Interface Overview. Hello friends, I'm glad to welcome you to our course. I hope that it will be not only useful, but also interesting. AIM School team is with you. Run the program. Photoshop 2023 welcomes us. And the first thing that catches my eye is of course the welcome screen of Photoshop that is very happy to see us. Those files that I opened last, we see them here. On the left side of the screen, we can select various options. Also, what about Lightroom? I don't have any photos here yet. Maybe, like you, if you don't work with this program yet. We are more interested in these two buttons, Create and Open. I mean, create a new file and open some of the existing files. Let's start by choosing Open. A dialog box opens, the same as always when opening files. We select the file we need and click Open. And now it will open. Photoshop allows you to open multiple images at the same time and switch between them. To do this, go to the File menu, select Open in the drop-down list. Unfortunately, I don't have all the menus in the recording area, but here at the top I have the button Open. It is the second from the top, but it is the best to use the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+O. It will be faster. Select another file. And now I have opened such a picture. That is, I can move from one image to another and take something from one image and put it in the second image in this way. If you need to see both images at the same time, then you can do this. Pull out this window a little by clicking the mouse and place this image, for example, somewhere nearby that is convenient for you. You can compare these two pictures and perform other actions. In some cases, it can be very convenient. You can pull out not only one window like this, but also a large number. When you no longer need this option, then you just take it and drag it up until such a blue frame appears. If you release it, the picture will be fixed in the top again. It is really very convenient, especially when you make some kind of collage. But sometimes we need to work with some detail and at the same time see how the changes we have made affect the entire image. And then we can open the same image in multiple tabs, in two tabs. To do this, go to the Window menu and select Arrange. And then I choose a new window for the file, which I have just opened. And if we look, we have the name of the file written on the tab. It repeats twice. This means that they are actually the same file. And then I take, for example, this tab and pull it out here. I can move this window to a convenient place in which I can see everything well. And let's say I want to work in more detail with this part of the image. For example, I want to change the eye color or do something else. I zoom in as close as possible to work with some fragment that I need for this. And at the same time, I see the image in full size and see how the changes will be reflected in the image as a whole. We will consider all these operations in more detail, how exactly we can make some changes. Now we're just getting acquainted with some basic concepts of the program interface. After achieving my task, I can return this window to its place. It may or may not be needed again. I can click the cross and then this window will just close. There are different ways to approximate the image. We will consider all of them as we continue the course. Now I will show you the simplest of them. Let's choose Magnifying Glass tool. You need to click on this tool. It is called Zoom. You can open it in several ways. First, by clicking on the magnifying glass image itself. Second, by clicking on the icon itself. Or the last one, by pressing that key on the keyboard. And then we can click the magnifying glass on the image and it will zoom. If you hold down the Alt key at the same time, it will be zoom out. In the future, we'll also look at the other ways to zoom in and delete the image when we configure all the program settings, because some of them are not enabled by default. I also want to show you other ways to open a file. Sometimes we want to open several files already from Explorer. Then we can go to the folder we need, select Open, select the desired folder, and we can simply highlight all the files that we need to open, choose Open, and they will open at the same time. We have the other ways to place an image on the screen, besides that one I showed earlier. If you go to the menu window and select Arrange, then you can see some list of ways to do this. Well, for example, I will choose this one, and you see, we have placed the images. So, you can choose the option that you like. If you look through all these options, Window, Arrange, then you'll understand which one can be more convenient for you. You can return to the original state by selecting Combine Everything in tabs. Everything has returned to its previous state, but most often, of course, people use the classic tab layout, because it meets the needs of most users. Let's talk a little bit about the program interface. At the top, we have the main menu, in which we can perform basic operations with our image. For example, we have already opened it, but we can also save, close, do some other operations. There are filters, the ability to edit images. We will consider all this in other lessons. The upper menu is designed to perform some general tasks and to work on the image as a whole. That is, for example, by going to the File menu, we can open, close, save, or do some other general actions with our file. In the Filter menu, we can apply some filters that will change our image in general. If we go, for example, to text, then we will see different options related to what we can do with the text. Now let's go to the Tools panel. If working with the top menu involves working on the image as a whole, then working in the toolbar is completely different. We will talk about the fact that we can work with some area, some fragment of the image in a certain way, and there is its own tool for each of the types of action. You have already become a little familiar with the magnifying glass tool. As you can see, when the tool is active, it is highlighted in such a dark gray color. Now it is active. Let's say we have moved our image a little. The Hand tool, which is called by the H shortcut, allows this image to be moved around the screen, so that is convenient for us to work with the part that we need. And now we can perform some actions with the muzzle of this cat. And I want you to note the following. When we select any tool, now I select this one, it is called Burn. We have an additional menu in the upper part that allows you to configure this tool, and when you open any of the other tools, this will happen again. Also, if necessary, you can move the toolbar to the part of the screen you need. Well, for example, you can move it to the right. Sometimes it is really more convenient. For example, in cases when for some reason you don't want to work with the keyboard, don't want to use shortcuts, while you have a large monitor and you have to move the mouse actively in order to get to the left side of the screen. And usually people work with their right hand, so in this case you can move it, for example here. You can also click on these arrows to make all the tools be in one line. Now they are on one line and I can return them in the same way back. If you need to move it, we take this place and drag it to where it is most convenient for us. And now let's talk about another very convenient element of the interface. It is called the palette. It is located in the Window menu. Here we have a lot of different palettes, each of which is responsible for a certain set of actions. For example, let's open the Navigator palette. We already know that it is possible to zoom in with a magnifying glass, but the Navigator palette allows us to do it with a percentage display. And as you can see, there is such a red square, a rectangle, which you can move and select the part of the image that you want to zoom in, as close as possible. There are other palettes. For example, we can go to the palette called Brush, and it will provide an opportunity to select the necessary brush for drawing. Here we can see a large number of brushes that we can choose and customize as we want. Thus, it is an additional part of the interface, which on the other hand complements the top menu, on the other hand complements the toolbar. Let's talk about the organization of work with palettes. You can minimize it by clicking on this icon, and now you see different palettes on the right side of the screen. They are minimized. In addition, you can also open them from here. For example, open the same navigator. You can click and this palette will open if you have it pulled out here. Now I was opening the brush palette. Look, this one. In the minimized state, I can take it and move it here. Let's see, a blue stripe lit up. And then, if you need this palette, you can always open it like any other palettes. You can edit or remove palettes. For example, I can click the cross and the palettes will disappear. Thus, you can create the most convenient workspace for yourself. That's actually all I wanted to tell you about the interface elements. And also, you can close the file by selecting File, Close, or using the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+W. If you think it is necessary to save the changes, then you save. If it is not, then you don't. We don't have any changes that I would like to keep. I want to say a few words about how our course will be organized. Each lesson will have a specific homework, so that you can solidify your knowledge. To complete this homework, we will give you the same images that we use in the lesson. You can take these images that we saw today and practice on them, or on your images. Open a file, place it in tabs, close the file, practice with zooming in, deleting and scaling the image. Then the homework will be more difficult. That's all for today. AIM School was with you. I am waiting for you in the next lessons. Software Workflow. Hello dear friends, I'm glad to welcome you to our next lesson. And of course, I understand that you can't wait to start doing some real work in the program. But before we get to that, let's prepare well. And the preparation will consist in preparing a comfortable workspace for ourselves. You understand? If there is house on your panel, then working on it will be not pleasant and not very convenient. Now we are going to set up the software for ourselves. So let's get started. Last time we talked about palettes. These are special mobile windows that make your work more comfortable. Imagine that you are an artist and you have a palette of colors in front of you. You choose the right shades. This is similar to working with Photoshop, where you choose the settings and characteristics you need. It depends on what the direction of your work is. So you choose one or another set of palettes. And now we'll talk about this in more detail. If you look at the top menu, then on the window tab, you'll see a list of all the palettes offered by the program. Those palettes that you have opened will be ticked. For example, I would like to have the Layers palette open. I click on it and now it has opened. Here we see the Layers palette. If we go back to the window tab again, we will see we have a check mark opposite the word Layers. Thus, we can choose the palettes that we need at the moment. But what about if we are just starting our work and don't even know what palettes we may need, because we are not very familiar with what the program can offer for us? There is a certain set of workspaces already prepared in advance in the program, among which you can choose. And of course, you can create your own workspace. Let's see what it looks like. For example, we go here. Here are all the workspaces created by you or by default. Click on the arrow. We see a window in which the workspaces that are currently available are indicated. By default, we have the main workspace. It is a set of palettes that, according to Photoshop developers, are most commonly used and most suitable for a large number of users. When the program is launched the first time, we will see this workspace, exactly this set of palettes. And you can look at these palettes here, open them, get to know them a little. As we study the various functions of the program, we will get acquainted with those palettes that correspond to a particular lesson. Let's now see which workspaces are installed in the program by default. Each of them implies some separate direction of Photoshop. For example, creating 3D, working with graphics, the internet, animation, drawing, and photography. Let's look at an example of drawing. In general, drawing in Photoshop is a very exciting activity, and let's see what possibilities Photoshop offers in the form of palettes. So we choose drawing, and the first thing we see is a palette with paints, on which we can choose different colors. There is also a palette in which we can choose different brushes and customize them as we want. This is similar to a huge set of brushes with different textures, shapes and sizes. it can be wet, dry or calligraphic ones that we can use as we draw. But this palette will be more active if we use the brush tool, which is just connected with the work of this palette. Here we can be a real artist who has a palette with paints on one side and a jar with brushes on the other side. There are also other palettes that you may definitely need when drawing. For example, such a palette as layers. It is useful in general in any case, whatever you are doing. So this palette is included in all major workspaces. And when you create your own work, you will definitely need it too. Well, for example, we can see the Navigator palette, which we talked about, and some others. Let's take a look at the workspace that is offered for the photographer. We choose photography and we have completely different palettes that photographers use when editing photos. Here we can adjust contrast, levels, curves. There are also tools that allow to play with brightness and contrast. We can work with a color tone. With saturation, you can take a photo in black and white, change the color, do a lot of things what photographers do when editing photos. As you can see, palettes take up some space on the screen, especially if your monitor is not big enough. It can be interfaced with your work on the image a little, because it sometimes covers most of the workspace. So you can click on these arrows and minimize the palettes so that they open up to you as many opportunities as possible to view your image. If this doesn't seem enough to you, you can press the magic tab key. Then I'm pressing it now. And in this case, both palettes and tools disappear. You have maximum opportunities to see your images. And in this case, you can work using keyboard shortcuts. By the way, I advise you to start learning them right now. Well, you can return everything to its original state by pressing the tab key again. Also, you can remove from your monitor not only the tool palettes, but also the upper command menu. To do this, you need to go here. I will not choose this parameter now, because the frame of the displayed area will disappear outside the recording area and you will not see it anyway. Or you can double click on the F key to remain only your image. It will turn out something like this. You will have an image on the entire monitor, and you'll be able to see it in all its glory. Pressing the F key again will return everything to its original state. Let's go back to workspaces. Now I open the main workspace and I want to show you something. Suppose for some reason we took and deleted some elements of the workspace. Well, somehow we took and deleted them. We no longer have them. And in order to get them back, you need to go here and select Reset the main workspace. And we return to about the same as it was at the very beginning. By the way, there are also sections such as training in which you can look and find some interesting information. And now let's try to create our own workspace. To do this, I go to the window and check the boxes opposite those palettes that I think I will need. For example, I need layers, because it is always necessary. I need history. Let's assume that I need only these two palettes, not others. Then I just close them. I click on the cross. So I have only two palettes left. If you move them to each other, then they will stick. I can minimize them to make such a panel. Let's create a workspace. First, we select New Workspace, enter a name and click Save. And if we look, we have a new workspace. If several people use Photoshop, everyone can keep their workspace under their own name. And look, I go to the photo. Here we have the same settings that we saw earlier. I go to my workspace and I have the panel that I created. Why are there three icons here? Because the layers palette always goes with channels and contours. Let's move it to a more convenient place. For example, here. This is how you can create a workspace for yourself, and the palettes you need will always be at your fingertips. I recommend that you practice and do this as a homework. Create your own workspace. Get to know a little about other workspaces. And that's all for today. AIM School was with you. See you in other lessons. Program settings. Hello dear friends, Before we continue our journey through Photoshop, let's customize it for ourselves. Of course, there are some settings that are set in the program by default, but also we are free to use and make the program to our needs as possible. So, open the program and start. The options we need are in the menu, Edit, Preferences. Here we can choose General, and we have a window with the default settings. Let's look at them in order. The first thing we see is a color palette, and the Adobe color palette is offered. There is also a Windows option here, but of course the program works well with its own colors. So we leave what we have now. The next parameter is very interesting. It's the HUD color palette. Let's see what it is. There are several options here. So I choose a color scale and click on OK. This parameter is responsible for how the color selection will be reflected when working with a brush. In order to see this, you need to select the brush tool. Then press the Alt plus Shift key combination, the right mouse button, and hold them. You see, we have a scale like this. I'm holding down the right mouse button, but at the same time, I've already stopped to press Alt plus Shift. So I can choose the appropriate color in this way, and the scale can be larger or smaller. Let's leave it and come back again to Preferences General, and we find a color scale. As I said, it can be small, medium, but the color wheel and color tone wheel are a little different. For example, look at color wheel. We hold down Alt plus Shift plus the right mouse button, and here we have a color wheel, in which we can choose colors as we want. While working, it is very convenient to switch to color selection. And the next option that we have here is the color tone wheel. Let's choose it. Click on OK. Alt plus Shift plus right mouse button, and look, I can move and choose the color I need. And at the same time, you can pay attention to the changes of the color of the square, which determines the main color of Photoshop, or the upper square on the toolbar. We will talk about this in the next lessons. But remember that you can choose a color this way. So I left the color tone wheel. You can choose what you like best, at least at first glance. We can change it later. The next parameter that we will consider is image interpolation. Interpolation is a way to transform an image when zooming it in and out, when resizing it. Here we can choose the option that is better to maintain quality for the main operations that we perform. Well, for example, bicubics sharper, best for zooming out, is more suitable in cases where you have to zoom out the image, which actually happens much more often than image zooming in. But I think the best option is bicubic automatic. This parameter answers most requests, so I choose it. Next, we have other parameters. It don't greatly affect the operation of the program. In general, if you check all the boxes, you will not see any significant changes. The only thing you would like to note is that the checkmark Clipboard Expert means that Photoshop documents can be exported to some other programs with layers saved. And if you uncheck this box, then this function will not be implemented. Next, I want to draw your attention to the Recorder All Messages option. I'm sure you know that sometimes programs gives us hints about some actions, and if you don't want to see them, these messages will no longer be shown. So you can uncheck the box and this message will no longer be shown. But if suddenly you want to see the hints pop up again, then you can click Recorder All Messages. As for the Reset Settings on Exit option, this means that you can set the settings for one time, for one session of your work. And after that, the next time you work, the settings will return to default. The next point in the Preferences menu is the interface, and here everything is clearly intuitively. The upper part of the window is about working with the appearance of the interface, and as you can see, now we have a medium gray, but we can change the color of the interface, for example, to this. As you can see, it has changed immediately. Let's leave it, because I think this is one of the most suitable options. There are no interesting options left, except for the interface language. English and some other languages are also shown in the program. and then you can choose what is most preferable for you. Let's move on. Workspace. Here we leave all settings as they are. The only point is the option Restore Default Workspaces. This applies to those cases if you did something wrong with your workspace. Do you remember talking about it last time? So, if you decide to restore everything as it was, then in this case you choose this option. Let's move on to the tools. There are simple hints and tips, and there is a function Use Advanced Hints. Simple hints, it's when you hold the cursor over some tool or option and a small yellow window pops up in which is written about the operation of this or that tool or option. Now I close the window so that it can be seen. For example, I hold the cursor over the brush tool, and an animated window appears that shows how this tool works. And at the first stages of getting acquainted with a program, it can be useful, interesting, exciting, but over time it can be boring. By the way, if you suddenly want to learn more, you can click on here, find out how, and then you'll have a training panel where you can get acquainted with the work of this tool in detail. So, let's return to our tips. If you decide that you are already familiar with everything and these windows are bothering you, you can turn them off. And I will go back to the Preferences menu, Tools, and see these animated hints. You can uncheck this box wherever you want. I will check it anyway because I still like to consider these hints, although I'm familiar with all the elements. The next parameter is Scale by Hue. What does it give? I have already checked this mark, although it is not checked by default, so I click on OK and show what it is about. For example, I want to zoom in an image, and with this option enabled, it's enough to scroll mouse wheel forward and the image zooms in. If I scroll mouse wheel back, the image will be zoomed out. That is, it seems to me this is must-have. This parameter should be enabled. The rest of the parameters that was set by the developers can be left as they are, because this is in general the most optimal option for work. And we move on to the change history. By default, this option is disabled. It is needed when you are doing some work in which all your steps should be recorded. For example, you want to confirm your authorship. If we check this mark, we'll be enabled to choose in what format the reports on your actions will be saved. I uncheck it, because I don't need it. Let's move on to file processing. Here, in principle, you can also leave it without any changes, but sometimes it is useful to use some thumbnails of documents. That is, when you look at the Explorer, you can see the information about the file. Here you can choose wherever to save or not, or to save from time to time. We leave the settings without changes. Next, export. Here all the settings are optimal and don't change them, but go to productivity. It is worth to note the memory usage should be at least 70%. We leave it as it is. If a slider is shifted to the left, then it's worth returning it to a value like this. Somewhere 2 or 3 of the stripe should be blue. The next important parameter is the action history. That is, how many steps you can return in the history palette. This is a palette in which all your steps are recorded within the specified number from your last action, and you can, if necessary, go back a certain number of steps. This is actually very important, and the number 50 is probably one of the most optimal. And we move on to the next section, working disks. Here we are talking about which disks RAM will be used when processing your files. Most likely, you initially have a checkmark opposite C drive on which the program is installed. In many cases, this is not enough. For example, in my case, if I leave a checkmark only on C drive, then the computer will slow down. So I prefer to use the resources of D drive as well. Sometimes it is recommended to check the box only on D drive, in order not to overload RAM for C drive, on which the program is installed, when it is debatable, because your need of enabling or disabling this function depends on the power of your computer. If you have an ordinary computer, then check the boxes opposite C and D drives. Next, let's go to the section Cursors. Here, in general, it is clear that you can choose different cursors. You'll use these advanced functions when you have a lot of experience working with a program, because you understand some unique nuances that you need. and then probably you change something here to do what you specifically want. We leave it unchanged. Go to Transparency and Ink Coverage. Perhaps you know that transparency in Photoshop is displayed like this chess, and the appearance of this chess, these squares, can be changed. That is, you can change the color, you can change the size of the grid. You would like to say that these are mostly decorative things that you can change as you want. Here you can make not only a gray grid, but also the red one. Our next option is units of measurement and rulers. I think we should use more familiar parameters. For example, it is better to use millimeters for rulers. What about the text when we set its size? We can immediately understand how it will look at the scale of our document. To do this, we use pixels. You can always go back to this parameter if you want to change it to do something else. We leave the default resolution of new documents as it is, because this is a generally common resolution and this is the best option. Then there are the following parameters: git grid and fragments. Here we set the colors of various auxiliary elements that will help us align some elements of our document. And here you can change their color. For example, it is necessary when you have a git grid of such a bright blue color and the document itself has the same color. You simply don't see the git grids on this background. In this case, it makes sense to change the color of git grids or any other parameters in order not to prevent you from work. External modules. Here we don't need to change parameters, because here in general we don't have anything worth changing. Let's go to the text. Here, in the same way, everything is fine. It is clear if you read what it is about, and we leave it by default too. What about 3D? Here too, we leave all the parameters by default. We will talk in more detail about the options that are indicated here in the lessons where we will consider 3D. We will leave the technology views by default. So we have set all the general preferences that affect the quality of our work. Perhaps you'll want to change something else later. But for now, we click on OK. Some settings do not change immediately, such as the interface color. If you have changed the language, you should restart the program to see changes. We installed all the necessary settings, and now it is convenient and comfortable for you to work. From time to time, as you will need to change something, you will return to these settings and change them. The main thing for now is to remember what and where can be changed, and change your settings that I recommended to you. This is your homework. AIM School was with you. We're waiting for you in the next lessons. Goodbye. Creating a new document. Hello friends! Last time we already touched on the topics of creating your own document, and today I suggest to talk about this in a little more detail. But first I want to draw your attention to the difference between opening a document and creating it. When we talk about opening a document, we mean opening a previously created image and performing some further operations on it. Creating a document is the beginning of work from scratch. It's like we're creating a blank white canvas on which we can draw any elements, any image. Last time we created a document with you using this button, Create, and now let's try to do it a little differently. Suppose we're already in the program. For this I will press the button with a Photoshop icon and decided to create a new file, a new document now. To do this, go to the File menu and select Create, and immediately note that the opposite there is a combination of hot buttons, Ctrl+N. I highly recommend that you memorize these shortcuts, as using them will make your work faster and more convenient. So I click Create and a dialog box opens that allows me to create new documents. Let's go in order. First, we're offered the recently created documents as templates for creating a new one. The program remembers a certain number of documents I have created recently, and I can choose one of these documents in order to reuse it. This can be convenient if you often work with documents of the same type, and I can choose one of the proposed samples, and I can change something in it, change the resolution and something else. For example, I can change the background color if I click on this square and select a color in the suggested window. For example, now I have chosen this green color. If everything suits me, I click OK. And the new document will have this green color. After that, I can click Create. And I have a document of the selected color on which I can now draw something. In order to consider other options, I will now press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+N and go to the next tab. It's called Saved. Here I have saved the latest templates that I used. Photoshop offers free download of some templates, and we'll see how it works in other tab right now, because that's where they actually comes from. Or I could now take one of the templates, for example this one, and try to open it. But still, it will be better to get acquainted with the templates by opening them in other tabs, which we will do now. Let's open the Photos tab, and here the program offers us templates that are most often used for printing photos. Everything is not limited to these four, of course. You can click View All Styles, and you will see some more. You can go to any of them and see its parameters. For example, if you have something specified in inches, you can choose this template and put centimeters instead of inches, which are more familiar to us, so that it's clear what size this template is supposed to have. Change the horizontal orientation to the vertical one, and as you can see, the height and width in this case are reversed. By default, resolution is 300, since photos are usually printed. The same tab offers templates that you can use to design your photos. You can choose any of these templates, and your photo will be placed in the template that you have chosen. Well, let's for example choose this template and choose Upload. After that, it will appear in the saved folder. Here, we have already seen the templates that I used earlier. So, Upload. It takes some time to download, after which a checkmark appears when the download is completed. And I select Open. And I have a template like this that I can insert my photo into. Now I'm going to open the Layers palette. Here I have it. And here we see all the elements of this image. We'll talk in more detail about the layers in the following lessons. In the meantime, I will just show you what it looks like. In the future, you can use this in your own projects. In each of these templates, there is a special line, a special layer, where it says your image here. We have to select this line, but for example, if another one is selected, it is highlighted in a light color. So I choose this particular line. Then I click on this light gray square, sketch of the frame layer, and now I have such corners that show that I chose this one. And now it remains to select the photo itself. I already have it open. Here it is. In order to copy and paste it to the place we need, I press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+A. I have a selection. Then I press Ctrl+C in order to copy it. Then I return to the tab with our template and press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+D, and here my photo is placed in the right place. Then I can take the Move tool and place it in a way that I like more. At the same time, I can turn on and off different elements, and the photo will acquire various new features. I understand that now it may seem somewhat incomprehensible what I have just told, but this is such a mini demonstration. We will consider all these options as we progress through the course. And now I just wanted to use this example just to show you that you can use a certain number of free templates that are in the program and thus somehow decorate your work. I pressed Ctrl+N again, and let's go back a little bit to creating the document. Look now, in recent documents I have a template that we just used. It also appeared in our saved ones. And we will move on. Let's take another look at the Photos tab. Here there are some more templates, but if you have not selected any of the suggested ones, you can enter a keyboard by which you can search here in this line and select Find. And we go to the Print tab. Here, just like in the previous tab, we have a number of templates that are used for the most frequent jobs that require printing. And you see well-known formats such as A4, A5, A6, A3. In order not to remember their sizes, when you need to create an A4 sized image, you just select the desired template, and that's it. is already set. You just have to choose the orientation, vertical or horizontal. And just like in the tab that touched the photo, there are some templates here that are called mockups that can be used for various design works. The principle of working with them is exactly the same. Once again, I want to draw your attention to the fact that we will consider all this in great detail in the relevant topics. And what I am now showing with an example with a photo was just a small demonstration of the program's capabilities. Let's go to the next tab, Illustration Graphics. Here, too, some options are offered. The most understandable for us are poster and postcard. As you can see, the size is in inches, but as I have already told you, you can select the desired image and put, for example, centimeters or millimeters. Then it will immediately become clear to us what size this postcard is if suddenly you decide to create it. And of course, there are a number of templates over here that you can successfully use or look for new ones. For the internet, well, the principle is the same here. I probably won't even talk about it too long, because I think the principle is clear to you, and you can just take it and use it. Mobile devices. You can create images that will look great on the screens of your cell phones by selecting the option you need. And here there are also templates in which you can create a design where you can see how this image looks exactly. It can be very interesting sometimes. And the last tab is movies and videos. The principle of orientation here is exactly the same as the previous versions. That is, you choose from ready-made presets and can, if necessary, add some other elements to them, or you can use such ready-made things. That's all about this document creation window, and now I want to show you a couple of examples of how you can create a document and immediately edit images from the internet to it. Now I have opened one of the works, and for example, I would like to put it in Photoshop. I right-click on it, select Copy Image, go to the software Photoshop, and File Create. And as you can see, I have a clipboard window in a recent documents, and I click Create. And I create documents of exactly the size that the picture I copied was. The green color is here simply because that I had chosen the green color and I didn't change it to white. I make a Ctrl+V and the picture I have stands up exactly the size of exactly the file that I created. In a completely similar way, you can also use the print screen function. If we want to take a picture of the monitor and put it in the Photoshop software, and now I press print screen, go to the Photoshop software, press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+N, and look, I already have a completely new format in the clipboard, the format in general of my monitor, and I choose the white color, create, and again click Ctrl+V. And so, my screenshot is placed in the program. Photoshop provides us with such opportunities to create new documents. I hope you try and remember them, and this will be your homework. And AIM School was with you. See you in our next lessons. Opening and saving a document. Hello dear friends, we continue to conquer the peaks of the Photoshop software, and today we will talk about how to open a file and how it can be saved. Go to the Photoshop, go to the File menu and select Open, or the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+O. At the same time, we can, as usual, select the folder we need and select the necessary files. If we want to open several files at once, then we can select one, hold down the Ctrl key, select one more and click Open. And in this case, we'll open several files at once. As you can see, they all appeared in tabs. But we can change their viewing in the same way. If you remember, we had a lesson in which we considered the possibility of ordering, arrange and choose the location that seems to us more relevant and convenient for the current moment. Well, for example, I will choose Mosaic, and so it opened for me in this way. If I want to go back to the previous viewing option, then I select the Arrange and combine everything in Tabs window. Here everything is back as it was. It was such a small digression, a reminder. The next possibility of opening is using the Open As option or the keyboard shortcut Alt plus Shift plus Ctrl plus O. Why is this necessary? Sometimes the Photoshop software cannot independently determine the file format. Well, for example, this can be happen when transferring a file between two operating systems. If before that, for example, you worked on a Mac system, when you will try to open the same file in Windows, an incorrect indication of the file format may occur, and in such cases, it is just necessary to choose the correct format for opening such a file. Let's see what it looks like. I click Open As, and here I have an additional dialog box in which you can just choose the format in which you want to open the file. This can also be useful if by some mistake you saved a file in the wrong format and now you want to open it the way it should have been. For example, a file that should be in PSD format, we'll talk about it in a few minutes, you saved in a GIF format, and your work can no longer be continued in this way, and you need to return the correct format. Then, from the suggested list, you can choose the format that you need now, and of course, click Open. And another option for opening is using an additional module called Bridge. Let's see how it works. We select File and select Bridge Overview, or Alt plus Ctrl plus O. At the same time, we have an additional module loaded. Here I have it. Now I will place it so that it can be seen. And in this module, you can select files to view, and in order to work with them somehow in the future. For example, I select the local disk D and select the folder I need. So I choose a folder in which I can view and select images. But this is somewhat more convenient than the GITs, because let's say I can look at each image more closely. That is, I can select them more preciously by viewing the preview on a large scale. In addition, in the software, you can also edit keywords, tags, create an image rating, perform batch processing. That is, the same action can be applied to many photos at once. In general, the Bridge program, which means bridge in translation, is very useful, and we will certainly talk about its other functions in the following lessons. And now let's just talk about how can we open the file we need. For example, I like this photo. I will click on it twice, and here it opens in Photoshop. This software is especially useful, of course, for photographers who constantly have to process and view a large number of photos. And now let's talk about what file formats are and how to save them. In fact, Photoshop offers 22 file formats for saving your work. But today we'll talk only about the most basic of them, which are used most often. And in the absolute majority of cases, knowing these formats or using them will be absolutely enough. We'll begin our consideration of these formats with the PSD format. This is the native format of Photoshop, in which all the work is done. And let's go to the Photoshop software to look at a specific example of what this file is. So I opened a file in Photoshop in this format, and let's see what its features are. The fact is that it is in this format that you still have an ability to edit your image. You can go back a few steps, or for example move objects in your image as you need. Well, for example, we want to move this basket somewhere else. We can take it and do it. At the same time, the rest of the objects remain in its place. We can make some objects invisible. Here the leaf has disappeared, and there is a lot more that we can do. And since the creative process can be quite long, you can consider different options. Then, by saving the file in this format, you can always go back in the process of your creativity and somehow edit it, change something, edit something. This is the best option to save the work in the progress, while it is not finished yet, while you are still working on it, or if you want to save it for the future in order to change something later, then in this case the PSD format will be the best choice. But sooner or later there comes a time when your work is completed and it's worth showing it to the world. And in this case the TIFF or JPEG formats will be useful to you. Let's start with the JPEG format. This is the most common format in which we usually see all the images on the web. Unlike PSD, it's available for viewing not only in Photoshop, but also in all programs for viewing graphic files. And it is in this format that we see all the images that we meet on social networks. It is in this format that most our photos are stored. This is really the most common format, but it has both its advantages and disadvantages. As I have already said, the advantage of its accessibility and the ability to view it in almost any program for viewing graphic files. But the disadvantage is that when saving in this format, compression occurs, and the compression method is based on the fact that the colors of adjacent pixels are averaged. Thus, we lose some of the semitones, some of the subtle nuances, shades, and for a large professional work, this can be very significant, although this loss of quality may be visible to the naked eye. The advantage of files in this format is their low weight, the ability to easily place them on any resources, and in general, this is the most familiar format for us. Therefore, you just need to find a balance between the quality and the weight of the file, and everything will be fine. As a rule, we save in this format after we have completed our work in a file with a PSD format, unless of course we have other specific requirements for the file. Well friends, let's move on to the next format. This is the TIFF format. TIFF is a format for professionals, as it is the gold standard for printed and printed products. The thing is that, unlike JPEG, when it is saved, there is no compression, or even if it happens, then without loss of quality, and all the nuances, semitones, shades are preserved. The quality remains completely unchanged. But such a file also weighs much more. Files in this format are usually used by graphic designers in their work. Well, we move on to the next format, and this is the PNG format. In order to make it convenient to get acquainted with this format, let's go back to the Photoshop software. By the way, taking this opportunity, I want to show you that you can see the name and format of the file here. And here, after the dot, the format of your file is shown. And as you can see, we now have a file open in PNG format. And what is the difference? We see a beer on such a background. This cell here means that this background is transparent. That is, in fact, the beer particularly lies on such a transparent film, and we can overlay it on any other background. Let's see how it can look like. Here, for example, we may have a beer on such a background, or on another, or such a background. That is, one day we can save some element on a transparent background, and then, in the future, use it in various works. It can be very convenient, and it is in this format that all the elements in scrapbooking kits are usually stored. And the last form that we have to consider is the GIF format. Yes, these are the same GIFs that we know well from the same social networks. It is this format that allows you to save animation, and of course is also very actively used in web design. Now let's see how saving in different formats in Photoshop directly takes place. To do this, we need to select File, select Save, and Save As. If I choose just Save, then the image is saved in the same form, with the same name and in the same format as it was. If I click Save As, then in this case we are asked to choose a format from the suggested list. The list is quite large. I can't even show it in its entirety here, and here we can choose the format that we need, that suits us in the situation, and save it in it. That's all for today. I am saying goodbye to you. See you soon. AIM School was with you. Image navigation. Hello friends! For successful work in Photoshop, it is necessary not only to be able to open a document, but also in the future, in the process of your creativity, you will definitely need to take a closer look at some details, or move the document in such a way that is convenient for you to work in it. All this is called document navigation, and that's what we are going to talk about now. Let's take this lighthouse in New Zealand as an example, and talk first about how you can zoom in and delete the image. But you probably already remember, of course, and I will remind you anyway. By scrolling the mouse wheel backward and forward, we can zoom in and out of the image. And of course we can use elevators to move this document around our workspace. Now I'm going to show you a few other ways we can do this. We will start by looking at the palette, which is called Navigator. To open it, go to the Window menu and select Navigator, and you get this palette, in which you see a preview of your image. In the lower left corner of our palette, you can see the scale in which this image is currently presented. That is, now I have about 30% of the actual size of this picture. I can put 100% like this. And now I have an image just here as its maximum scale with maximum quality. Of course, I can zoom in even more. And notice when I scroll mouse wheel, the numbers here continue to increase. And the maximum zooming in that is possible at all. It occurs until the pixels begin to be visible. Let me go back a little bit anyway. Perhaps you have already paid attention to this rectangle, which shows exactly the part of the image that we see. And if, for example, I want to look not at the top of the lighthouse, but at some other part of the image, then I can take the rectangle and start moving it. And as you can see, other parts of the image that fall into the area of this rectangle become visible. And this is the way I can move the rectangle around the image. And when I move the slider, of course, it decreases, because the area that is visible to us becomes smaller. If I move the slider to the left, the opposite effect occurs. That's about the way it all works. Let's minimize the Navigator palette and look at other options. I wrote them up. You can remember its icon. It looks so much like a steering wheel, and if you want to return to this palette, you can always click on the steering wheel and it will open again. Another way to zoom in and zoom out an image using the Ctrl and plus key or Ctrl and minus key. I press Ctrl and plus key, and each press of plus brings the image closer. If I press minus, the image is zoom out. The Ctrl key remains clamped at the same time. And for scaling, you can use the magnifying glass tool, which is called by the hotkey Z. Let's take this tool and look. When I click on the image, it gets closer. If I want to move this image away from me, on the contrary, then I can either select a magnifying glass with a minus sign in the top menu, or just hold down the Alt key, and as you can see, the magnifying glass icon appears in my menu, and I can zoom out the image. Alt released, plus again, and I zoom in on the image again. Let's consider other settings. If we look closely at the top now, we will see that our image is now represented at a scale of 33%. And if we click on the 100% button, let's do it, then now the image will increase to its maximum scale, meaning the scale at which the image is displayed in its maximum quality, without loss, and further increase will already lead to loss of quality. If we select the next button, which is called Fit, then, as you can see from the hint, the image will be scaled to fit the screen. So I click, and as you can see, we have our image completely visible, and it fits just in the border of our workspace. If I select full screen, then all the free spaces that were on the sides before are removed from me. These are the free buttons. Let's see how the other settings work. For example, adjust window size. We'll put a tick here. Initially, it doesn't stand here. And in order to make it clear how it works, I will pull out this tab with our image so that we have it separately. Here is this tab. Let's do this. And now watch what happens. I take the magnifying glass tool and click on the image. And look, at the same time as the image increases, my window also increases. I click again and the same thing happens. If I now hold down the Alt key and zoom out, then the window shrinks along with the image. In order to make the difference clear, let's remove this check mark and see what happens. Look, I click with magnifying glass tool. My image is getting closer. That is, the window doesn't change its size. I hold down the Alt key, click the magnifying glass again, the image still changes its scale, it decreases, and the window retains its dimensions. Let's put the image back in place like this. And in order for us to view the next option in all windows, we'll do this. We'll make a window arrange two up vertically. You already remember this operation, and now we have two images opened at once. And let me check all the windows. Look, I take the magnifying glass tool again and click on the left image. And you see, the right image is enlarged in the same way. Every time I click the mouse, the image gets closer and closer. And of course, it can be reduced in a similar way. Alt and both images start to shrink. And this may be the case not only with two images, but with the number that you are using at the moment. And let's look further. Uncheck in all windows and consider scaling by dragging. If you just leave this check mark and move the wheel back and forward, then the image either approaches or is zoomed out. But if we remove this check mark and at the same time hold down the left mouse button, we can draw with a magnifying glass tool such a rectangle or any other area. And now the exact area that I'm trying to highlight is coming closer. I release the left mouse button, and as you can see, this area becomes as closer as possible. Well, we have figured out the scaling of the image. Let's now see how to navigate through the image. Let's open some image in which there would be room to move. I'm currently using an image of a landscape from New Zealand. This is a beautiful place, and let's look at a tool called a hand. Here it is, and it is called by the H key, as you can see in the hint. And that's what happens when we have this tool active. If I zoom in on the image by scrolling the mouse wheel forward, and for example I want to see another part of it, I just press the left mouse button, and with the hand tool active, I can move the tool along the surface of my workspace as I like. That is, I can move it. Periodically, I switch, for example, to zoom in out by scrolling the mouse wheel. As I said, this tool is called using the H key. But sometimes it's not very convenient to see where is the key on the keyboard. And suppose you were working with some other tool, for example a brush, so I'm going to take such a rather big brush now. Just like that. For example, I drew something with this brush, and I need to switch to the hand tool now to see what I drew closer. I pinch the spacebar and hold it, and while I'm holding it, the hand tool is active, and I can move the image around the screen as I like, as soon as I let go. I have the same tool that was turned on before. I press the spacebar, hold it, the hand tool is active again. That is, in the process of working, it is very convenient. I highly recommend that you just remember this moment by pressing the spacebar. The space key, you can go to the hand tool at any time and exit it. By the way, if I want to remove what I drew, I can just press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+Z. It will be a step back. Once again, I pressed Ctrl+Z twice. This is a small addition. The hand tool has the same settings as the magnifying glass tool. Let's just look at scrolling in all windows. I have already opened two files at once, in the way you know. I tick the scroll in all windows, and look, I move this image. I have an image that is open at the same time. This is how you can view some parts of the image, if it's important to do it at the same time. There is another tool hidden under the hand tool. If we click here and hold on this arrow at the bottom of the tool, we will see that there is also a view rotation tool, which is called by the R shortcut. Let's see how it works. What is it for? With it, we can rotate the image. So I just clicked on the image and look, I'm rotating. A compass like this appears, and I can rotate the image. What is it for? It wasn't by chance that I opened this image with a drawing, because when you do something like this and you need to draw strokes by hand in all directions, it can be convenient to do. Well, for example, I took the brush tool and continued to draw something like this, maybe some elements of the image. That's something like that. And suddenly it seemed to me that it wasn't inconvenient to draw the lines that I needed in this particular angle, and then I take this tool and rotate the image in such a way that it is convenient to draw the same lines. That is, I take the brush again, and for example, it is more convenient for me to hold it from top to bottom, than from left to right. After I have done everything I need to, I can double click on this tool and everything goes back to its original place. This tool will probably be more understandable to those who are engaged in academic drawing and understand that it's not equally convenient to stroke under all directions. Here is another feature that releases to moving tool. By the way, yes, the instrument, which is called hand, here, let's say U2, here I will bring it closer, so that at least something moves, somehow moved there. And if you want to return everything to its original state, then click on it twice in the same way and everything returns to its place. And I will show you another option from the same menu, image rotation, and flip the canvas horizontally. There will be mirroring in this way, and if you reflect the canvas vertically, then this mirroring is already in a different direction, like this. That is, these turns of the image remain, and those that we did with the help of the View Rotation tool, a temporary turn solely for the convenience of your work. As a homework assignment, I recommend that you try all these ways to scale and move the image. If you have any questions, of course, you can always ask them. AIM School was with you. See you soon! Image resolution and size. Hello dear friends, we continue to study Adobe Photoshop. Today we continue talking about pixels and resolution. As you already remember, a raster image consists of pixels, such small multicolored squares that become visible at high zooming in. An image consists of pixels in the same way that all living creatures consist of cells, and it is the number of pixels that affects the image quality and affects what we call resolution. Resolution is a measure of the clarity of the details of a raster image, and it is calculated in pixels per inch. The more pixels per inch, the higher the resolution. In general, an image with a higher resolution allows you to get a higher print quality, which of course is worth remembering. Obviously, the image on the left side, which has a higher resolution, looks much clearer and more attractive than the image on the right side. Let's see how we can find out resolution of a particular document. So I open the file and we can go to Image, select Image Size and press the Alt plus Ctrl plus I shortcut combination. We have such a sign that indicates the number of pixels in width, height and of course resolution. Right now you see a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there is a certain rule about resolution. If we want to prepare a picture for printing, then we should have a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. But if this picture is shown on the internet, then 72 pixels per inch is enough in this case. In addition to the resolution, here we also see the file size in width and height. That is, it turns out that we have 4667 squares of pixels in height and 7000 pixels in width. And if we multiply these two values, then we get what is called the image size in pixels. And this is the number we get as a result of this multiplication. And now let's see why we need to know about this. Of course, there are a lot of reasons and a lot of situations in which this information can be useful. But we will consider the simplest daily situation. But we will consider the simplest daily situations. Let's suppose you are choosing a photo for your desktop. Let's suppose you are choosing a photo for your desk. Let's suppose you are choosing a photo for your desktop. Let's suppose you are choosing a photo for your desktop. And in this case, you need to pay attention to what resolution your monitor has. And in this case, you need to pay attention on what resolution your monitor has, what size in pixels, in width and height. One of the most common sizes is 1920 to 1080 pixels. But of course, your monitor may have another resolution. Your task is to compare the size in pixels, in width and height accordingly to your monitor settings and the image you want to use. Because if the picture turns out to be smaller than the resolution of your screen, it will lose completely all its attractive features, because it will become less sharp and less clear. And if the picture is very small, then we can face with the pixelation. Well, you already know how to see the effects of the picture. Also, if the image is larger than the resolution of your monitor, then nothing bad will happen. The picture will adjust to the size of your monitor without losing in quality, sharpness. Also, you should note the following. The higher the resolution and the larger the size of the image, the more it weighs. There is another important rule. If you are creating an image for demonstration on electronic devices, then in this case you set the resolution to 72 pixels per inch. And if you plan to print your image, then in this case the resolution should always be 300 pixels per inch. In the next lesson, I will tell you about how all the parameters are set when creating a file. Then we will look at where the resolution parameter is specified. And your homework for today will be to remember that the more pixels in 1 inch of your image, the smaller they are, and the higher its quality. And of course, you should always try to use the image of the best quality. Don't forget that you use 72 pixels per inch that you will look at on the screens, and this will be enough. And you need to set 300 pixels per inch for printing. Well, that's actually all I wanted to tell you. AIM School was with you. We are waiting for you in the next lessons. Color models. Hello friends, in the previous lessons we got acquainted with the pixels and learned that each pixel has its own color, and today we'll talk about color in the Photoshop software in more detail. And today's lesson will be devoted to RGB and SMIC color models, each of which has its own characteristics and its own purpose. And we'll start with RGB color model. This color model uses 3 colors, red, green and blue. And it is by the first letters in the name of these colors in English that the color model was made. But why these particular colors? Let's take a closer look at the screen of our monitor to better understand this. This is what it looks like. If you look at it at high zooming in, you see a large number of red, blue and green light bulbs. It is thanks to the color of these light bulbs that we will get our richness of colors that were used to seeing from the screens of our monitors, televisions, mobile phones and other electronic devices, because they all display color according to the same principle. So, how does this happen? Light from bulbs of different colors mixes in the perception of our eyes, creating a variety of shades. More than 60 million colors can be created using the RGB spectrum. If one of the bulbs is turned on more intensely, then it is the shade of this color that prevails in our perception. If all the light bulbs are turned on to the maximum, exactly to the maximum, then we see a pure white color. But if they are turned off, then we get the well-known black color of the turned off monitor. If all 3 light bulbs are turned on with the same intensity, then we get different shades of gray. If they are turned on with the highest degree of intensity, then this gray color will be lighter, and if with a low one, then the gray color will tend to black. If we go back to our shim, we can understand that turning on the red and blue light bulbs at the same time gives a purple color. Turning on red and green, yellow, green and blue, blue. Of course, the bulbs can be turned on one at a time. Then we'll get red, blue and green colors of varying degrees of intensity depending on the brightness of this bulb. As you probably already guessed, the RGB color model is designed to create those images that will be viewed from the screens of electronic devices, monitors, televisions, tablets, mobile phones, and possibly some other that will only appear. Well, in those cases, when we need to print an image, a different color model is used. It's called SMIC. Its name is formed in the same way as in the previous model, with the help of letters from the names of the colors that form it. The first 3 letters are cyan, yellow and magenta, and the last letter is black, since black is added in this color model additionally. Although it would seem that mixing these 3 colors, blue, yellow and purple, gives black color, but in real life mixing colors give a dirty brown color, which is still not black. Therefore, black color is added additionally. Well, as you have already understood, mixing colors in Photoshop is the same as mixing colors on real paper. Perhaps you have already noticed the printers have just 4 containers with these colors. But back to our shim. As you have already noticed, when mixing colors, other shades are also obtained. If in the RGB model, in order to get the brightest possible color, the most white, the most light, there must be the maximum brightness of each of the primary colors. Then, in the SMIC model, everything is exactly the opposite. Remember, if we paint on the paper and we apply a thin layer, then the colors look lighter and unbright enough. And in order to get an intense color, the color should be put in a thick good layer, that is, with maximum intensity. And if in the RGB model the maximum intensity of all colors gives white, then here the maximum intensity of all colors give the darkest possible color. Another difference between these two systems that the RGB color model has a larger color coverage. Therefore, sometimes images that look bright and juicy on the screen lose all their brightness when printed. If you plan to print your image, then in this case create it immediately in the SMIC color model, because in this case you will get a correct display of all colors, close to the one that will be printed. But you should notice one thing here. If you view images created in SMIC in Photoshop or other special software and on ordinary Windows file viewing software, then you may display some terrible poisonous colors, and it may seem to you that the work is hopelessly spoiled. In fact, this is certainly not the case. It's just that files created in the SMIC color model need to be viewed in special software, for example in the Photoshop software. And now let's see how files are created in the desired color model. To do this, when opening Photoshop, we select the Create button. A special window opens, in which all the necessary parameters are set: width, height, resolution, and color mode. And if the width and height depend on important preferences, then as for the resolution and color mode, just the same. It directly depends on wherever your work will be shown on electronic devices or it will be printed. And if it is just being shown on the monitor, then we leave the resolution at 72 pixels per inch and choose RGB for the colors. That's how I have it installed now. If we are going to print the image in the future, then we need to set the resolution to 300 pixels per inch and set the SMIC color model like this. I draw your attention to the fact that in addition to the color models in the window, you can also immediately set the name of your document. Choose the orientation, vertical or horizontal. Choose the color of your background, and after you have set everything you need, you click the Create button. As a result, I have a new document with specified settings. In the Active tab, which is highlighted in white, the color model with which I created it is indicated, that is the SMIC color model. If I suddenly want to change this color model, then I need to go to the Image menu, select the mode. You see, now I have a check mark next to the SMIC color model. If necessary, I can change it to RGB in this way. And now I can work in this document in the RGB color model. Well, actually, that's all I wanted to tell you today about the SMIC and RGB color models. And your homework will be to remember well how they are formed and what they are intended for. Namely, the RGB color model is designed to create images that will be displayed on electronic devices. And usually these images are created with a resolution of 72 pixels per inch, and the SMIC color model is designed to create images that you plan to print in the future, and in this case their resolution should be 300 pixels per inch. Well, that's all now. AIM School was with you. Goodbye. Difference between vector and raster graphics. Hello friends, I hope that you have already changed all the necessary settings that I talked about in the last lesson. So today we continue our travel to Photoshop, and today we will talk about raster and vector graphics. Photoshop is a raster graphic program, although it includes some vector elements. So first we'll deal with raster graphics. Raster image are all photos, scanned images, and images created directly in Photoshop program. All these images have one thing in common. They consist of such small squares, I mean pixels, that you can see if you zoom in an image as close as possible. Let's try to do it. Last time in Preferences we set the possibility of zooming in and out of the image using the mouse wheel. Let's try to do it. I scroll mouse wheel forward. The image is zooming in. I want to use this hand tool and get it even closer. Look, the closer the image gets, the less clear it becomes. At the same time, we see the pixels with which all this gradation of colors is created. For example, the transition between a green leaf and the petal of a rose has subtle transitions of tones. Each square has its own specific color, but our eye works in such a way that if we are far away from an image or the squares are small enough, then we don't see them, but see the image as we are used to perceiving it, although, in fact, it consists of all these small pixels. People noticed this principle of color perception with our eye a long time ago. Our great-grandmothers created a lot of needleworks according to this principle. Look carefully. Isn't it very similar to pixels in Photoshop? And it is this principle that has always been used to create the most complex mosaics. So in general, the idea is not as new as it might seem. Let's go back to our pixels. Let me zoom in our rose again to see the pixels in all their glory. I remind you, we scroll mouse wheel forward and zoom in the image as much as we want. Sometimes I use the hand tool to move it around the screen. So look, each pixel has its own color. At the same time, all the subtle transition of tone and color of images are created by the fact that each pixel has a slightly different tone from the one being next to it. And how can we see this color? In order to work with the color deeply, we use the pipette tool. Here it is. Now I click on one of the colors, and at the same time it appears here. This will be the main color of Photoshop. If you click on the square again, we will see that a certain palette opens, where each color has its own number. For example, if I close this palette and choose some other color, then this number will change. But in order to optimize our work, let's try to do it differently. I just change some numbers here. So I typed in other numbers and my color changed. This circle shows the color that I have selected, and it is specified as new. Thus, all this beauty, this harmony is created with the help of numbers, because each color has its own number, and accordingly each square, each pixels is some kind of digital design, which means the color that it reflects. According to this information, we can conclude that if pixels are represented by a square of numbers, then these numbers can be changed. By changing the numbers of each pixels, we change its color and change the image as whole. This is what the work in Photoshop really comes down to, just changing the numbers. We change the numbers and the image changes. And as a rule, we are talking about millions of pixels. Just imagine the power. And now let's see what vector graphics are and what is the difference from raster graphics. Now I open a vector image and will try to zoom in it. And look what is going on. I zoom it in. I zoom it in more. Then look at the eye of this whale. We start to see some defects that the artists made when drawing, but no matter how much we zoom in. Now the image zoom level is 6400%. This is the maximum percentage. I specifically opened the image in the vector editor because here we can see all the nuances as well as possible. So the main difference between vector images and raster images is that no matter how much we zoom in this image, it doesn't affect its quality in any way. That is, we can zoom it almost infinitely. We can scale it infinitely too. But unfortunately, we cannot do the same with raster images. This is due to the fact that the principle of building vector images is based on a special mathematical formula. Each element drawn in a vector editor increases and decreases in proportion to their percentage without loss of quality. It just gets bigger or smaller. But another feature of vector graphics is that it is much more difficult to convey those color nuances, those transitions of semitones that are possible when working with raster graphics. Let's summarize. Vector graphics differ from raster graphics in that no matter how we increase it, we will never see pixels. It gives us unlimited scaling possibilities, but on the other hand, it looks applicative and doesn't give such color nuances, such rich color transitions as raster graphics. Although Photoshop is a raster graphics program, it still includes some vector tools, and of course we'll definitely get to know them during the course, and we'll learn about what affects the quality of raster images in the next lesson. You have to remember how a raster image differs from a vector one. And when you see some images on the web, try to understand wherever they refer to a raster or vector. I think it is easy to do this, even by indirect signs, because all images, scanned pictures, and collages that include elements of photography are, as a rule, raster graphics. Well, vector graphics often look like an application and always include large areas filled with one color. Although now there are such masters of vector graphics who create very similar to raster images, but there are very few of them, and at the time you'll also begin to accurately identify such images at first sight. This concludes our little dive into the depths of vector and raster graphics. I think you have remembered that the main thing in Photoshop is a pixel. I am waiting for you in the next lessons. AIM School was with you. Goodbye. Merging layers. Hi guys, last time we already looked at one of the options of merging layers, and today I would like to show you some other ways. But first I would like to draw your attention to a very important point. If there is a large element on the layer, then we can see it clearly on the layer icon, and we immediately understand what is on this layer. But if we want small objects to be clearly visible in the same way, we can do the following. Click here and select the panel options. And here we can change the content of the thumbnails. Now we have the entire document displayed as it is, and some small details are displayed on it in scale. For example, if you look at my yellow star, it is a small star. It's so slightly visible here. But if I set layer boundaries and click OK, then you see that immediately the image on the icons goes along the edge or the borders or the object that is depicted on it. And let's move on to merging layers. Last time we talked how to do it using Ctrl+E, when a layer is combined with a layer that is below it, and we combine two layers at the same time. But it doesn't have to be exactly two layers. Using the same keyboard combination, you can merge a large number of layers. For example, I have 3 layers that are related to a girl. This is a bubble, which assumes some kind of a text. Then I have a layer with glasses, and a hand on it, and a layer with a girl on it. Let's merge all these layers into one. So I hold down Shift, highlighting all these 3 layers, and press Ctrl+E. And I have merged the layers. The second option that I want to show you today is called the merge of visible layers. Let's leave the layers that we want to combine visible. Let's assume these will be layers that are related to the background, and these 2 asterisks. I turn off the visible layer with the girl, and I have those layers that are visible, and it will be merged now. But in order to combine the layers, it is necessary to make one of the visible layers active, otherwise it will not work. Let's choose this one. Go to the Layers panel and choose Merge Visible, and so all the layers that we had selected became one layer. Let's turn on the layer with a girl and consider another third and last option for today. Sometimes we need to create a layer that would include all the elements of all the layers that exist, but at the same time, the layers that already exist shouldn't be merged. This is called a composite layer. This layer will be created above the layer that is currently active. Therefore, we need to pay attention that if we want to include all layers in this layer, then the top layer must be active. To create composite layer, we need to press Alt plus Shift plus Ctrl plus N and plus E, and it have to be pressed at the same time. Meanwhile, we just get a layer that includes an image of all the layers which are placed below. So, even if we turn them off, we will see that here is our whole picture. It is presented here. It is like a copy of all the layers that are below. What could it be necessary for? There are a lot of applications for such a layer. I will show you one of them now. There is such a parameter as the layer blending. We'll talk about how this works in more detail in the following lessons. But for now, just for clarity, I will show you something. Layer blending modes. They are displayed in the window. We can sort through the modes by simply moving the mouse cursor from one mode to another. And you can see how our image is changing. That is, we can choose the option that seems the most interesting. I'm going to quickly scroll through them. Here, some of them look badly in our case. For example, I will choose this option, and note that the parameter I had, the usual ones, changed to multiply. The top layer is a composite layer. The layers that are related to the girl we combined using Ctrl+E, and the layers that we have on the background were combined with Merge Visible. I want to say a few more words about the blending mode. We have a multiply mode now. In short, the blending mode implies how the pixels of the selected layer are mixed with the pixels of the layers that are below, and thus the appearance of the image changes. Well, as I have already said, we will talk about it in great detail in next lessons. And now, the last opportunity to combine layers is to merge them into one layer. To do this, we need to go to the Layers panel and select Flatten Image. There is no keyboard shortcut for this operation, and it should always be done through the menu. Click, and we have all the layers combined into one common layer. Sometimes it's also necessary, but I'm still going to take a step back and leave the layers the way it were. This is so that you can understand what I want to get from you as a homework assignment. And your homework, as you probably already guessed, will be to take the same source file that we had and combine the layers on it in these three ways. It was Peter Romanov and AIM School. See you next time. Layer styles. Hi guys! Today we are going to talk about layer styles. Layer style is such an interesting operation that allows you to edit various special effects, textures, strokes, volume, color and shadow to the image. Layer styles are used very often for creating the effect of such frames as you see on the example, but it is also a very commonly used operation for creating various kinds of creative fonts. And now I want to show you some of them. I think you have seen this kind of fonts on the internet, and now we'll find out how it can be done. I think it would be better to learn layer styles on example. So, let's just type some text. Select the text tool, and it is called by letter T. And if you click here on this arrow at the bottom, you will see that there are 4 types of text. But so far, we're only interested in horizontal type. We'll talk about its other types in the future. Okay, next, the text options. They are similar to options in other programs, for example, in Word. I set the Arial font, because everyone has it, so that we don't have any big difference. But, of course, you can take another one. I set the bold style. I have a font size of 72 pixels. Color is black. You can double-click on the square and choose a different color. But in this case, I will leave it as it is. Then I click in the right place, and in the new version I have a preview of what my text will look like. I mean the size and style. In order to get rid of this inscription, I click and select it completely. The same way to do it, for example, in Word. I don't know why I'm writing own text, I'll just type the word text. The same way we do it, for example, in Word. And now I'm writing my own text. I will just type the word text in large capital letters. I can move it to the place I need. Please note, a new layer is created. It was created automatically. This is a layer with text. In order to enlarge this text, we can click on it twice. We highlight it just like this, and let's say, put some other value here. Then I click anywhere, and it applies. Or we can do the same as with any other object. Press Ctrl+T and make the size we need. So, we have a blank for our layer style ready. And let's do it. We will need a panel of styles. It is located in the window menu. Select Styles, and here we have a number of default styles. Let's see how they work. Activate the text layer. You could just click on it. Let's try to apply it. I click on any of the styles, and you see what happens. What interesting effects are added to our text, and there may be just a huge range of such styles, because the styles that you see now are not all the styles that are presented in this panel. If we click this icon here, then we'll have such a window that allows us to edit some other styles. Well, for example, I choose glass buttons. You can try some other ones. Let's try effects for text Added. OK, and we start our experiment. See how interesting it is. But, of course, in addition to those styles that are presented directly by the developers, you can both create your own styles and edit ready-made styles that you can find on the internet. Here, for example, I found styles called Gold. You can see how they will look and downloaded them to your computer. I open the folder where I have saved these files. It can be absolutely any folder, and so I select a file with the ASL extension and click on it twice. And now we have added gold styles. We can even use them. See how beautiful it is. In the appendix to this lesson, I'll definitely edit an archive with these styles and some others, and you can experiment with them. Let's now see how these styles work. The layer to which layer styles are applied have the fix icon. This means that some styles have been applied to this layer, and we can click here, expand, and see what specific styles are applied in our case. This is a list of the styles that have been used, and each of them has an eye icon that can be turned off. And look, for example, the shadow has disappeared, and it's not really visible here. Gradient overlay in a shadow, bevel emboss, stroke. And so, gradually we can see what the resulting effect consists of. But let's say we don't quite like something about it, and we want to adjust it somehow. In this case, we can double-click on the effect. We'll open an additional window. In this case, it is a shadow. How do I make it more visible? Okay, well, something like this. And now you can adjust here, for example, the size of this shadow. In this case, the size is more about blur, but the size itself, in the usual sense, is regulated by the slider. The placement and the angle of this shadow. All this can be adjusted. By the way, you can take the Move tool and even move this shadow. Well, let's say I want it to be here. Similarly, you can go to all the other tabs and adjust each of the effects. We could also adjust the level of opacity. I think that it's too black. Let's make it less black, and let's change its color. For example, to some dark brown, like that. Okay, that's the kind of shadow we have now. And we can also copy layer styles that we need. Let's write another word and try to apply the same effect that we have now. I take the text tool, click and select the inscription and write Photoshop. The Move tool, free transformation. For example, like this. And I want to apply to this layer the same effect that I had applied to the text. And if I press Alt and Ctrl at the same time and drag this icon to another layer, then these effects are applied here too. I release the left mouse button and look, the effect has been applied. So let's place it differently. Let's write another word. For example, this one. I want to show you another way. It is possible to apply layer styles by dragging. Or you can right-click and select Copy Layer Style. Select the desired layer and select Paste the layer style, and it has changed. This is convenient if you copy the layer style from another file, for example. You can't drag it so easily. Sometimes it's more convenient to do it this way. But in the future, you can edit each of these layers. And, for example, if I want, then I can, in this case, make a different shadow. For example, I will reduce it or I increase it. You can still refine it in the future anyway. Let's leave it as it is. If you want to delete the layer style application, then you can click the right mouse button and select Clear Layer Style in the drop-down window, and it is deleted. And now let's try to create our own layer style and at the same time talk about settings. In order to apply the layer style to some object, you can either click on the FX icon and select the object, or double-click on the right side of the active layer with the left mouse button, and I did it. And let's see what the settings are. We start from the very top, choose Emboss, and as you can see, as soon as I clicked on this word, the text changed. Everything is intuitive here. You can change all of this, and you can choose the option you need, which you think is the most attractive. You can also set a contour. Firstly, the contour also has its own style. You can choose it the way you like it best. You can change the range parameters, and you can make a stroke. Check the box, click twice, And look, we can choose both a gradient stroke and a color stroke. But first, let's look at the size. Now we don't see any stroke, because the size is very large. If we reduce it, we will see that we have such a gradient stroke. Moreover, it is located inside, but it could also be outside. And then we would have something like this. If we choose the position from the center, then the stroke is distributed between the inner and outer parts. And we can also change the mode of stroke. Everything works exactly the same as with layer blending modes. For example, if we choose multiply, then it will darken. But it's just not there visible in this case. I choose vivid light, and you see what happens. Well, let's leave the normal one, because it seems to me it's not worth changing anything here. You can change the opacity of the stroke. You can choose a color instead of gradient, and then we'll have the color that we choose. Well, for example, like this. But I prefer to leave the gradient. And you can also choose a pattern, by the way. And then you'll be able to choose the pattern from the presented samples. Or over time, you'll learn how to create your own patterns. And then it will also be presented here. You see, the stroke is made with pattern here, the scale of which can be changed. But let's leave the gradient. Let's move on. Gradient overlay. Here we can impose some additional gradient on the text. We can choose the sample from the samples presented here. For example, this one. Let's add the one which is by default. We can change its scale in some way if we want. We can change its transparency. For example, I set it this way. You can swap the colors by clicking the reverse. You can also make the radial gradient. Then it will go from the center or angle. Then it will also change. Let's leave the linear one and go to the pattern overlay. Here we can impose patterns, not on the stroke, as we had before, but directly on the drawing itself. For example, this pattern gives the effect, but in general, we don't see it very well, because of such a scale. That's it. Let's try some other options. For example, I choose these dots, and at a small scale, it gives this effect. And we have a shadow left. We can do it all easily, because we already know how it's all done. I have some kind of shadow like this. I will blur it. That's the kind of shadow I got. So, what else to do with it? You can make a contour like this, for example, or like this. Well, that's my text. Let's leave it as it is. And I click OK. And hooray! We have created some kind of set of effects that we can now save as our own layer style. We can apply it in the future if we need it. To do this, click this icon in the Style panel. So, I press it. I have a request to create a new style. We agree with all this and click OK. And the last style that I have added is just my style. Let's check how it works. I have written the word test. I click the icon of my new style, and here it is applied. You can create your own style and apply it in the future. I slightly changed the arrangement of words in order to make it look a little more harmonious. And let's get to the homework. There will be two tasks. The first task is to set additional styles from those that will be presented to you in additional materials, and demonstrate this by writing some word or a few words. Well, something like what you see now. However, the shadow is not very good now. The original shadow was better than what I got. And the second task will be to create your own style and also demonstrate it on some layer. We continue to explore the possibilities of layer styles. And now we will look at what else can be done with them, using the example of this image with a happy couple. Now, in general, we'll repeat what we studied in the last lesson, but in a slightly different perspective. In particular, I want to show you how you can simply edit a frame using layer styles. Let's go into layer styles. I click twice on layer 3 on the right. I got a window layer styles. And now we'll make a stroke and a shadow. Choose to make a stroke. Here we choose a color and decrease the size of the stroke so that it is thicker. And look, my corners are getting round. This happens because our position is the center. If we choose inside, it will be like this. If it is outside, then like this. If we want to have no rounded corners, then we choose inside. Then we added a shadow. The shadow may be of any color, not necessarily black. Well, something like this. And we can, of course, change its position, the level of transparency. Let's say such a shadow suits me. Now I will copy these styles to another photo, which we also have here. Hold down Alt plus Ctrl and drag, and here we have such a rectangle that plays the role of a plug in the upper part of the image. I'll also transfer layer styles here, and here I want to draw your attention to one very interesting thing. Look, when we use opacity, when we reduce it, the object itself becomes transparent, and the applied layer styles become transparent. Let's go back to how it was. But we also have another parameter called fill. Here it is. We haven't talked about it yet. When we reduce the fill, the object becomes transparent, but the layer styles do not become more transparent. Let's leave it probably like this, and I think it's better to apply the multiply mode in this case, so that the image will be a little darker. Choose Free Transform, and I'll move it all a little bit like this. And now I have the effect of such a strip, and here I can, of course, remove this shadow. That's it. Now let's try to do something with the background. Go into Layer Styles, and let's choose a gradient overlay. You can see what's going on. How you can tone the background using Layer Styles. But this gradient doesn't seem right to me. I'll take another one. So, which one? Let's see which one is most suitable here, and I will make it a little more transparent. Just like that. Click OK. That's how we changed our picture using layer styles, and that's what we got as a result. Last time, with the help of layer styles, we learned how to create a flat shadow that seems to be just slightly away from the object. And today, let's learn how to make a drop shadow. As always, we go to the layer styles. Now, let's choose a shadow like this. A window with a shadow opens immediately. How do I make it more visible? So, we'll make the shadow dark brown, probably closer to black. So, adjust its size. That's the shadow I have now, and just like last time, it's exactly the same as last time. This flat shadow that's just slightly away from the object. Now, the most interesting part. Now, we'll turn it into a drop shadow. We cannot transform it in perspective now. We can only move it. But if we right-click, then in the drop-down window, we can't choose anything here, because I clicked the right mouse button on the layer itself, and the desired option didn't open for that. In order for it to open, you need to right-click on this space, which is located next to Effects, and select to create a layer, and we agree. And look, now the shadow has become a completely independent layer, and we can move it as we want. But this was available to us. Most importantly, we can transform it now, and in the free transform mode, with the Ctrl pressed, I select corners. And look what is going on. With the Ctrl pressed, I can distort the proportions as I need to. And we can arrange it, for example, like this. We can make the resulting silhouette of the drop shadow more realistic by using a mask, adding it. You probably noticed that the shadow is more intense, closer to the object itself, which is what we are simulating now. We will take a gradient, and away from the object the shadow should be more transparent. So we will do this on the mask. You see what happens? We can choose the location of the gradient in various ways, until we get some kind of option that suits us. Well, let's say like this. So I have decided on this option after all. And we can also, of course, blur the shadow a little. To do this, we go to the filter, choose blur, and select Gaussian blur. And now we see. You can choose the option that you like best. And click OK. That's the kind of drop shadow we got. Let's move on to the next example. And let's try to make this tree voluminous. We select the layer style, bevel and emboss, and set some parameters that will give us the desired effect. Here in this case I have an inner bevel, and let's say I would like this effect of layer styles not to be applied to the whole tree, but for example to be applied only to the foliage and part of the trunk. What can be done in this case? If we just take the eraser tool and start erasing, then we erase everything like this. In general, nothing good really happens. But we can go the other way. Look, go to Layers, select the layer style, and select Create Layers. In this case, we have each of the effects that the emboss effect consists of, separated into a separate layer, and we can work with each of these effects separately. For example, I would like to remove some of the illumination on the trunk. I choose and use a razor along the bottom of the trunk, and the illumination is removed only in this part. Or for example, I would like to reduce the opacity of the top layer, on which we just have a blackout. Look, the bevel remains the same, and the blackout, depending on what level of opacity is selected, looks completely different. This was the last task for today, and let's get to the homework. The first task will be the creation of such a collage with wedding photos. The second task will be to create a drop shadow, and the third task will be to create such a three-dimensional tree by changing the layer styles. And that's it for today. It was Peter Romanov and AIM School. See you next time. Clipping mask. Hi guys, today we will talk about clipping masks. You can see on the screen what we are going to do today, and we will start with this one. I have already dragged all the necessary images into one file, and now we will study the clipping mask using this example. The essence of the clipping mask is that the visibility of one layer is limited by the visibility of another layer. Moreover, this layer which sets the frames for the image is always located below. In our case, we have a girl and such lace vignettes that we will use as a frame. So, how to create a clipping mask? Let me remove this one for now, so that it doesn't interfere with us, and leave only this black element, which we will have as a clipping mask. In order to create a clipping mask, we need to hover the cursor between the two layers and hold down Alt key while clicking. As you can see, there is such an arrow, and now our image of the girl has become limited. In fact, it can be seen by the borders of this vignette. If you click Ctrl+T and zoom in a little bit, it will be obvious that it fits exactly here, along the borders. I am now moving up and down. You see that the image is bounded by the borders of the image below. But I can also change the size of the clipping mask itself. I click Ctrl+T on the clipping mask layer, and look, I'm reducing, and only what is within the boundaries of this mask remains visible. You see, I will do a little more, so adjust the size. Here, let's assume this is the way it suits me. It's quite simple, but despite the simplicity of this tool, you can use it to create a huge number of very interesting effects. By the way, we can also move the layer, which is a clipping mask, and a main one at the same time. We need to press Shift, take the moving tool, and move it as we need. And in order for us to have the same effect as shown in the example, let's finish it all. I turn off this layer. So, I think I need to reduce all this. I press Shift, select Ctrl+T, I place it in the center. Then, as you can see, I have such a small shadow here. It's easy. Edit another layer, take the brush tool, and just draw on a clean layer. Well, something like this. You can then reduce the transparency of this layer so that it is not too bright, as you like it best. And we are now using layer styles to do this volume effect. We'll talk about layer styles in the next lesson. And now I'll just show you one moment. I double click on any free place on the layer, a dialog box opens, and you select Emboss and Settings as I have. And here it is. See? Click OK. That's the effect. You can also, of course, move it so that all this is smooth. And so, for example, this is how we leave it all. This exercise was pretty simple. It was made just to show you how the clipping mask works. But still, I'll ask you to make it as your homework assignment. Now we'll move on to more complex exercises. Let's take an image of a girl. And first of all, we need to separate it from the background. Let's do it exactly the same way we did it in the last lesson. Unlock the layer. Take the tool. Quick selection. Select carefully. By the way, you can cancel the selection anytime if something suddenly went wrong by pressing the Ctrl+D. Click the mask icon, separate it from the background. Create a clean layer below the layer with the girl, which we will fill with black. In order to create a layer below, you need to press Ctrl, and only after that you need to click on the layer icon. And in order to fill in the background color, in our case it is black, press Ctrl plus backspace. So I got a black background. Now of course you need to soften the edges of the image with a girl. We do the same thing as we did in the last lesson. We're adding feather, but this doesn't really improve the situation. Therefore, we can take a translucent black brush and using along the edge, and the edges of the image become more transparent. Look, the gray color appears here. We are now practicing the material of the last lesson and learning a new one at the same time. So, swipe along the edge. This can be done several times, increasing and decreasing the intensity of brush exposure. We can adjust its transparency several times until we get an effect that suits us. I want there to be no such rigid boundaries, so that everything goes smoothly into the shadows. Well, something like that. And now we still create a clipping mask in form of this lace. We need to take a file with necessary image, copy it, and put this lace that we have. The mask will become transparent. We will move it here. It will be useful to us. And now we will need to create another clean layer. And now you'll understand why. These two layers will be our clipping mask. For me, it is layer 2 and layer 3. And if you want to make a clipping mask with two layers at once, you need to combine them into a group. Select these two layers, pressing Shift and click the group icon. Here is this group, in which we now have two layers. That will be a clipping mask for the girl. Press Alt and click between the layers. So now both of these layers are used as a regular mask. But it's better for us to remove this layer now, so that it's clearer and easier for us to work. We don't see anything because the layer 5 is just empty. There should be something on it. That will be a clipping mask. And if it was some kind of object last time, now we'll draw this clipping mask ourselves. Take a black brush. I remind you that if you don't have black and white colors here among the colors, then press D and they are restored to you. X key swaps them. I haven't taken a black brush because it has to be black. In fact, you can take the color you want. But in our case, taking into account a large amount of transparency, I will take black. And now I will draw. So, the most important thing is to make this layer active, layer 5. And I start to use a brush. And as you can see, an image is gradually displaying. Everything will depend on how transparent your brush is. I increase the transparency of the brush, and it turns out as if the girl is illuminated more from this side. And by changing the transparency of the brush and its size, we can achieve the effect we want. If something goes wrong, then I can always fix it. The effect is we draw on this layer with a brush. It's not a mask that we have seen before. I mean, if I start drawing with a white brush now, original view will not be restored. If after all something has already been drawn, it is better to erase it with an eraser. When we draw on a layer when there is no mask, we use eraser to return something to the original state. We take an eraser. This tool can be opened with E key. So, take the eraser. Just like the brush, it has a degree of transparency that you can adjust, and the greater this percentage, the stronger it will erase. For example, with a percentage of 15, it will erase a little bit and return black color. But if I put 100, look, that's it. A black color of the bottom layer coming back. But not because this layer is coming back, but because I am erasing the borders of the image on the layer, which we have as a clipping mask. This is an important moment. I'll just go back now. Well, 100% is too much. Let's add less. For example, I want to edit some shadows here. I edit it in exactly the same way. Where I want to erase everything, I will set 100%. Back to the brush. Let's take a 100% brush, because in this part of the face that I would like to highlight as much as possible, I will take a bigger brush. I can arrange all the color accents with the help of a mask, just like that. And now let's connect this layer to our clipping mask. I make it visible. And let's place this pattern so that it corresponds to what we have in mind. So I take the move tool and move it somehow like this. We can also change the size. I want it like this. And in order for this pattern not to be so active, reduce the transparency. For example, to this size. And now let's talk about the eraser again. Look, altogether, these two layers create a clipping mask that masks some parts of the image from above, but each layer itself is not a mask. They are not the same as this one on this layer. Therefore, we use an eraser to move some parts of this layer. So we take this eraser, and now I'm going to erase it here, because these elements can be visible. Look, a transparent area appeared right here. And in those places where I think that the pattern is too active for me, we'll now reduce the transparency of the eraser to half, and it will not erase this pattern completely, but only half. Look, I use it here, and it erases it by half and gives a certain volume. We can make this pattern a little less intense along the borders of the face with the help of an eraser. That's it. Now I realized that I need to display the girl a little at the bottom of the image. I'm moving on to layer 5, where we have a brush drawing. I take a black brush and add it a little here. You see, everything is highlighted right away. Since I have a 100% brush, it immediately lit up so actively. If I want to do it less actively, I again take a 50% eraser and erase a little, and I get it like this, maybe a little more. In general, you can do all this for a very long time. All this is such a rather delicate work that can be done for a very long time. Probably, it seems to me, it is also possible to remove a little pattern in the eye area. I'll make a smaller brush and an eraser on the layer with the pattern. I'll work here a little bit. Then I will come back here on a layer with a brush. I will take a brush and I will use a reduced brush in the eye area to make the eye brighter. See what happens. Therefore, I will reduce its opacity, and I do it again, so that the eye is highlighted. Here in fact, you can do a lot more with the help of different tools. It's just that we're still limited to the minimum that we have studied, but everything is still ahead. Finally, let's take this pattern and also edit it to our image, and we place it where we would like. Notice I placed it above all the layers, and you can reduce the transparency so that it is not so much visible. Well, this is the result we got. This is your second homework assignment for today. I hope that you will be able to do it. Now I will try to explain why the dark lace that we added becomes light on the girl's face. Look, clip-in mask makes visible those parts of the image that somehow marked on the clip-in mask. We have a black background. There is the girl and layers of clip-in mask that regulate the visibility of the girl. Let's remove the lace for now, so that it doesn't confuse us. Originally, everything looked like this, and there was nothing painted on this mask. Let me take an eraser now. I'm now moving to the layer where we have already done something, and erase it. Look, we can't see anything, because we don't have anything on the clip-in mask at this moment. But if I take a brush and start to draw something, let me set the opacity of the brush to 50%, about 50. I'm starting to draw. We can see features of a girl, but please note that they are not fully showed, only by 50%. It means that the girl's visibility is not fully restored. If I make the brush more transparent and use it, then these areas are illuminated more. Please note that if I look closely at the layer icon, then you'll see that we have the maximum black color in this area, where here our brush is completely non-transparent. There the image of the girl is completely visible. In fact, we make these areas as visible as possible by adding dark areas. Now let's move on to the right side of the girl's face. Now we have her face shown here by 50%, since this is the brush we used. But if we, for example, take the 100% brush and use this brush in this eye area, then the eye will be fully shown. You see, a black dot appeared here. It happened because this area became completely transparent, and it's the same with the lace. When we added absolutely black lace, this part of the face becomes completely transparent, and through the lace we see the photo as it is, and the less transparent the brush is, the more visible the lace pattern will be. And if we want, for example, to make lace even more noticeable, then we need to reduce the degree of brush exposure in this area. Let's do it with an eraser. By the way, it could be done on the layer mask, but I'm just not going to confuse you now. It may look rather difficult, so we will take an eraser. If we have an eraser with 100% opacity, then we will completely erase what we drew with a brush in the right part of our face. Look, we will now erase the impact of the brush in this part of the face with an eraser. Here, look what happens if we use 100% eraser. The brush effect is completely erased, and at the same time the lace becomes very clearly visible and the face is not visible. If we just make our eraser half transparent and start using it in some sections, then it will be something like this. But to make it look more aesthetic, it's better to take a soft eraser. Select soft eraser. Look, I can use it on the edges and added some shadows to make the girl's face still more voluminous. And at the same time, the lace itself becomes even more noticeable. I use it there. Look, the brightness of the lace is determined by two factors. The first one is directly the image as it is, and the second is the degree to which we display the image due to opacity. Let's summarize. Clipping mask makes the girl face visible, otherwise we would only have a black background, and by marking certain areas on the clipping mask, we display certain parts of the girl's face, and specifically, in this situation, the degree of face display is determined by two factors that overlap each other. This is a semi-transparent brush that only partly shows the features of the girl's face, and an absolutely opaque black lace, which shows the girl's facial features completely, and it's due to this that we see lace as we see it, light. If we take the black brush and start drawing here, then we simply will not see the lace, because it's also completely black. That's how it is. It was Peter Romanov and AIM School. See you next time. Basic layers, the concept of a layer. Hi guys, today we are going to talk about layers. Layers are a very important part of Photoshop, and it's absolutely impossible to use Photoshop effectively without knowing how to work with layers. If you look closely at this landscape, it will be clear that these multicolored layers reflected the time intervals in which some changes took place, and each specific period of time the color of the soil is different. And in the same way, in Photoshop, each layer has a certain meaning and its own message. In Photoshop, layers are like glass shelves on which various parts of the image are located. Just like in real life, if we look from above through the top shelf, we'll see everything that is on the shelves below. If we put some objects on these shelves, then of course we'll be able to see through the shelves everything that is below. And also we'll be able to move objects on each of the shelves. At the same time, we will not affect other shelves at all. This is exactly the principle of working with layers. It implies that you can work with some part of the image, the one that is on a separate shelf, and the contents of the other shelves will not change in any way. Let's imagine that we have 3 glass shelves, and now we will put separate parts of the image on them in order to understand how layers work. So we have the first glass shelf. Now we are going to make a layout of a simple Valentine. To begin with, we will put a postcard with inscription on our first glass shelf. After that, we will place the glass above the heart and drag the ball. Now I have demonstrated how to place objects on layers in Photoshop. Each object is located on a separate shelf, but at the same time, we see all the objects. Unless we want to make some layer invisible, we'll talk about this later. Well, let's see what our Valentine looks like if we remove the shelves. And now let's see how the same Valentine will look on layers in Photoshop. We open Photoshop, and first of all, we have to display the Layers panel. I click on this icon to open the Layers panel, and just in case I remind you that if you don't have this panel, then you click on the window and select Layers. When there is a check mark here, it means that this panel is open. The panel is called Layers, and of course it is better to remember that you can simply press the F7 key to open this panel. So we have our Valentine card, and let's take a look. We have 4 layers under different numbers in the Layers panel. Layers are like those shelves on which we placed various parts of our image. We can move from one shelf to another by clicking on the bar with the name of the layer, and then it is highlighted and the selected layer becomes active. We are now trying to do something on a certain shelf. For example, I can disable this eye icon here, and then everything that is on the particular layer of the shelf will become invisible. Or let's look at this layer, for example. I also click on it and disable the eye icon, and my ribbon disappears. But to make it easier for you to work with layers, it's better to give them names, so that you don't have to remember layer 1, layer 2 and so on. For example, in order to name this layer ball, I click here twice, and now I can enter any name I want. I can rename any other layer. There is another way to find on which layer an object is located. We'll need the Move tool. It is a very convenient selection tool. Please note that I have checkmark on Auto Select right now. This means that if I click on an object now, the layer on which this object is located will be automatically selected. And so I click on the heart, and the layer with the heart is selected. Let's rename it too. Click twice and write a heart. Like that. The same can be done with all layers. The next thing we can do is move objects on our layers. Let's take a Move tool. Now we can move the heart to any other place. Note that the other layers do not change at all. I only work with one layer. All the others remain the same. Well, for example, I could move the heart here. Let's bring it back. Otherwise, it doesn't look very good. If you want, you can also change the size of the thumbnails that display what is on each of the layers. Click here, select the panel options, and here you can choose the thumbnail size that suits you. Let me choose a big one, just to demonstrate how it will look. And you can choose the option that is more convenient for you. So I put a dot and click OK. And look, I have now stretched the panel of layers, and the thumbnails have become quite large. If it will be more convenient for you to navigate the document by the images on the thumbnail, then you can choose the size of thumbnails. And since we have started making postcards, let's practice on one more. Let's try to make a postcard layer by layer from different elements and arrange them on different layers. Attention, what I'm going to show you now will be your homework, so watch carefully. So the first thing we need to do is create a new document, but you already know how to do that. So we create a new document. Press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+N. We will set the settings of our document. It will be 1000 to 1000 pixels, a square document, and we can immediately set the name, like that, and click OK. I have a new document with a white background. By the way, when we created the document, we could also choose a different background color, but we will not do this, because now we will drag all the elements into this document, and each of the elements will be located on a new layer. Let's press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+O and open all necessary files that we need at the same time. I select all the necessary files. We'll have 5 elements on this postcard. And so I choose Santa Claus and hold down Ctrl and select the other files that I need. I click Open, and all these files, as you can see, are now in the tabs. Now we can click Window, Arrange, and for example, select a tile, and you see, we have our files on transparent background. These are PNG files. I told you about this format in one of the lessons, and now we see how convenient it is. Just in case, let me remind you that in this format the image is on a transparent background, and that's exactly what we need right now. Now let's get it all back. Window, Arrange, and select Consolidate all to tabs. Let's take our file that we created. It's called Santa Claus, and we'll drag it like this, so that we have it right here. And we'll start dragging all the elements of our composition onto it, step by step. Right now we see only one layer here, which we call the background. This is the layer that was created by default. Now we take and edit the background here first. I click the background tab. Here we have it, and just drag and drop the file into the document. Okay, the Move tool was active at the time, and now with this tool I'm aligning the background to the size of my document background. Note that another new layer has appeared in the Layers panel. Let's rename it right away. I click twice and name it Background. And let's move on. The next thing we need to edit is the houses that we will have at the bottom of our postcard. Let's do the same thing I did before. So we open the houses. It appears here. We see that the Move tool is active. Hold down the left mouse button, click on the image of houses, and drag the houses into our image without releasing the left mouse button. Click OK and edit houses. We place them where we need. Just like that. Another layer. Let's call it Houses. Next, we need to edit snow. Let's do it in a slightly different way. I'm going to put this tab back in place now. like that. And I will open the tab with snow. Here we have a tab with snow. Here we have a snowflakes on a transparent background, but they are white, so it's hard to see them. But if you zoom in a little, then you can still see that there are snowflakes here. And let's try to copy and paste them. In order to copy something, you first need to select something. We press Ctrl, and as you can see, we have such a dotted line along the edges of our image. This means that we selected it. After you have made sure that it is already selected, press the Ctrl+C to copy image. Copy it, then go to our file. It is called Santa Claus. Open this tab and press Ctrl+V. As you can see, another layer was immediately added. I can take a Move tool and move the snowflakes. We have them right here. And now I notice that the placement of the houses is not very smooth. I can take the Move tool and move them. I remind you that if you have Auto-Select checkmark, then you click on an object. You have the exact layer on which this object is highlighted. So if I click on the snowflakes, then I will have this last layer that I got when I added snow. Let's rename it too and move on. And now we have only Santa Claus and the inscription Merry Christmas. So Santa Claus, the same way. Open and press Ctrl+A. Select it. Ctrl+C with copy. Move to our main file. Press Ctrl+V and add it. Here it is. Rename it. And we have only the inscription left. You can do it any way you like to do it. For example, I can do something else like this. On the contrary, drag the inscription here. I will have it in the foreground now. I take the Move tool and drag the inscription here like this. Yes, emptied profile mismatch. The error that now occurs. It just says that the image was created in different color spaces. But for us, it's not important now. Click OK, and we had the inscription Merry Christmas appeared. But we can either close this one or return it to its place. And now, in the created file, you can once again make sure that you can disable and enable the visibility of some layers. Sometimes it helps to work more effectively with some elements. That's also how we can change the order of the layers. Let's see, for example, I'm going to take Santa Claus and move him down a little. And look, Santa Claus is in front of my houses, and the houses are in the background. If we look at the sequence of layers, there we see that the higher the layer, the closer it is to us. We see in the foreground those layers that are higher in the panel of layers. But if we swap them, then everything will change. Here, I now take the layer with Santa Claus, click the left mouse button and drag it down below the house layer. See what happened? It dropped to a lower shelf. This layer began to be lower, and therefore our houses came to the foreground. In the same way, we can bring everything back, like that. This way, we can change the sequence of layers and set the position we need. Of course, this is not all that can be done with layers, and we'll learn other features in the following lessons. And now, let's save our file. Let's choose the format in which we will save it. We can save it either in JPEG format, and then we'll get a postcard that we can already post, for example, on our social networks, and send it to someone. But if we assume that the document will need further editing, we need to save the layers, because in this case we can again, let's say, change the location of Santa Claus, move it here, but we won't be able to do it in JPEG. And now we will save it in PSD format, so that you can change it later. So we save the file, click Save. In the selected window we look so that we have the PSD file type, and here we choose OK, so it's saved. When saving the file, also note that the Layers checkbox is enabled, so that all these layers that you have created are saved. Let me show you where it is again. This time I will choose Save As. Here, look, there must be check mark. Click Save, but I have already saved it. Therefore, I will not do this. Well guys, this was our first practical task. I hope that you'll be able to make wonderful Christmas cards. Let's say you have completed your homework, but your file is so large that even after archiving you can't upload it. We have a lesson in the course that is dedicated specifically to file size. But perhaps you have encountered this problem a little earlier or just want to find out about it as soon as possible. Let me tell you how you can reduce the file size and archive it. First of all, we need to find out what size our image is. We need to go to the image menu, select the image size or press Alt plus Ctrl plus I. After that, we have a dialog box with the size of our file. At the top, we see the size of our file. And here we see the height and width values. I have pixel values, but you can change it to a value that is convenient for you. Well, let's focus on pixels now. So, I now have a height of 5748 pixels and a width of 4106 pixels. As a result, with a resolution of 300 pixels per inch, I get the image size of 67.5 megabytes. And we need to reduce it. Please note that this icon, which stands between width and height, should look like this. If it is enabled and you change one of the parameters, then the second one will also change proportionally. And if you disable it, then each of parameters can be changed separately. We'll turn it on, and now I'll reduce the height values to 1000 pixels. So I type 1000. See how much the size of our image has changed. Actually, this is what we were aiming for, what we need to get. Click OK. After that, our images became smaller. It can be seen clearly, but at the same time, its quality is good enough, so that I could, for example, see how well you did your homework. After that, the file must be saved. And if you want a large size image to be saved too, after all, it may be useful to you for something. And then we will save the file with a different name. I go in the File menu, click Save As, and then select the folder to which I will save my image. Let me edit the word small to the file name. After that, I click Save. So we have already reduced one file. Let's reduce the second file that goes in the same homework. We open it. Go to Image, Image Size. Let's see what we have now. The image size is 63 megabytes, and these are the height and width parameters. We reduce the large parameter to 1000 pixels. Look at the size of the image. OK, and I will save it with a new name. File, Save As. Added the word small. Now let's try to achieve large and small files and compare the result. To begin with, let's take two source files. They were called The Girl with Lace and The Child Source. I select these two files by holding down Ctrl. I click on the first one, press Ctrl and click on the second one. I press the right mouse button and select Edit to Archive. Here I have the name of the archive. Select the zip and click OK. And now I will archive the reduced files. So choose a girl with a lace small. Press Ctrl. I choose the second small file. Edit to Archive. Choose zip. Click OK. Here we have the second file. Let's see what size they are. We pull the cursor to the reduced one and see 6.9 megabytes. We pull the cursor to the original one and see its size. Look at how much our file has compressed. This is how you can reduce, save and archive files, so that you don't have problems with uploading them. Well, maybe it will just come in handy someday. I hope this explanation was clear enough. It was Peter Romanov and AIM School. Goodbye. Operations with layers. Hi guys, today we will continue to learn how to work with layers and do new practical exercises in order to master this topic. First, let's take this file. As you can see, different parts of the image are on different layers. At the very bottom, there is a layer that simulates crumpled paper. On the next layer, there is a city landscape. Then there is a girl, and above them there are text layers. And now I want to show you how we can change the position of these layers. We talked a lot about this last time, but now we'll discuss it in a little more detail. For example, last time we talked about how you can just point the mouse cursor on the desired layer. Press the left mouse button and drag this layer to where you would like. Well, for example, I'm going to drag this layer with the girl, so that the inscription is behind the figure of the girl. You can also do this using keyboard shortcuts, Ctrl and square brackets on the keyboard. For example, now I hold down Ctrl and press the left square bracket, and you see, for every time I press the square bracket, the layer moves one step back. We can't go below the background layer, because this layer is locked, and you can see it by this lock icon. We'll talk about what a layer lock is in a few minutes, but for now let's get back to our layer movement. Sometimes there are so many layers, it can be counted in dozens. Such a step-by-step movement of layers can be inconvenient, and for example, you need to move the layer either to the very top or to the very bottom. In this case, the keyboard shortcut Ctrl plus Shift and the corresponding square brackets will help you. Let's say I want to move the girl image to the very top, so I press Ctrl plus Shift and right bracket, and that's how the girl turned out to be at the top again. So Ctrl and left square bracket is down, and Ctrl and right square bracket is up. And if at the same time we also press Shift, then it will be either the very bottom or the very top. But what if we need to move something that is on the several layers at once? For example, the text which I have is located on 4 layers, each word on a separate layer, and also such a white background for the text. And what if I want to move all these 4 layers at once, at the same time? For example, place them above the layer with the girl. There are different ways to do this. The first way that I will show you now is used in cases when you want to apply some action to layers only once. This means you are not constantly working with a group of some layers, but now you need to do some action with them. Then this way will work. So, how is this done? We select one layer and hold down Shift and select the other layers that we need at the same time. For example, I use this method, and now I have all the text layers selected. After that, I hold down the left mouse button and move these layers wherever I want. For example, I move them above a layer with a girl. If I want to cancel the operation, then I press Ctrl plus Z. Here I went back, and when I select some other layer, the selection is automatically removed. But there are such situations, and they are quite common, when you are constantly making some operations with the same group of layers. In this case, you can link these layers or merge them into a group. For example, I want to move all the text elements around the document at the same time. Of course, I can select them, as I did before. This is the way I will have the whole title move, although it consists of different elements, each of which is on a separate layer and can be moved simultaneously. But for example, if I select only one layer, I will move only this part of the title. And let's say I want to move this title somewhere, to see how it looks. I will do it maybe more than once. Then I select all the necessary layers and click this button here, Link Layers, or I press the right mouse button and select here Link Layers. It's the same thing. This icon appears here. Now if I click on one of these elements, then look, I have the whole block of text moving all together, the entire title. Thus, every time I want to return to the text block again and move it somewhere, all the text layers will move at the same time. Meanwhile, we can swap text elements inside these linked layers. For example, I can take this layer and drag it up. You can see that my white color has become higher than black, just like that, and back. But if I want to move the location of these 4 layers all together in the Layers panel again, I will not succeed. To do this, it must be all selected. And in order not to do this every time, if we perform some operations more or less regularly with some group of layers, it is better to merge them into this group. We select all the layers we need and click either this icon to create a group, or click the right mouse button and select Create a Group of layers. We can name this group. Okay, now I have a group that I quite define myself as a text group, which I can move entirely. Look, I take it and I immediately have the whole text move above the girl. At the same time, I can also do other various operations. For example, I can change the transparency of all elements at the same time. Here we have such a parameter. It's called opacity. When it is 100%, it means that the element or elements are completely non-transparent. Well, let's reduce it. We'll get a more transparent option. You can move and select the indicator you need. One of the main advantages in creating groups is that there will be a lot of layers in professional work, and you'll just get tired of scrolling through this entire palette of layers to find the layer you need. You'll have to constantly stretch it. This is very inconvenient. But when you have thematic layers combined into groups, it will be much easier for you to work. By the way, remember now this moment about the creation of group, because this will be the part of the homework. And also, when you create a group through this icon, you are not asked to create, or rather you are not asked to set the name of the group. A new group will simply be created. But if you want to delete it when you no longer need it, then you can just click the delete layer icon and it will be deleted. Or let's say maybe you want to edit something to this group. Let me get her back. For example, I want to put this girl there. Then I take it and drag it here to the group icon. And now I have a girl in this group. And I could, for example, move something else here. Let's edit a city landscape here. Like that. You just need to swap it with the girl. And now I have this group. How should I call it? So let's call it the girl in town. If at some point you decide to get rid of a group, you can right click and select ungroup layers. And now everything becomes as it was without the group. I will go back by pressing Ctrl+Z. So this is the first part of your homework. You need to create two groups like this. It is desirable that the group with the girl is below the group with the text. It seems to me that it looks better this way, but I don't insist on it. Let's move on. We have two groups and a background. Background is usually the name of the first layer when you create any document. And here you can always see the lock icon. While this lock is here, your actions with the background will be limited. This means that you, for example, cannot move it higher and cannot place any layer below the background. If you need to do this for some reason, then you need to unlock this background. In order to do this, you need to double click on the layer and you will see the dialog box that prompts you to set the name of the new layer. Let's do it. Now the layer is unlocked and we can move it. For example, like this. I moved it to a group with a girl and it is higher than the other layers. Now I'm going back. Let's say I could take the text and place it below the layer with the paper. I can't see it now because the layer with the paper covers everything. But if I make it transparent, then we will see that there is a text below this layer. Now I will take it all back. This will be the second part of your homework. You need to unlock this layer. Let's look at other blocking options. They are all in this block. Let's apply it to a layer with a girl. For example, this one. It blocks transparent pixels. Why do we need it? Sometimes you need to paint over something in the image and somehow do it carefully and without unnecessary problems. Let's choose this lock. Now we can see the lock icon on this layer. I take the brush tool. The color can be selected in the basic color palette, which we will talk about in the following lessons. Well, the slider moves up and down. Choose the color range and select the color you need. I choose this one, for example. And now I'm taking a brush. I can adjust its size using square brackets. The right bracket increases the size of the brush and the left one reduces. To make it clear to you, I will disable the other layers. Here we have a girl on transparent pixels and I would like to dye her hair. And so, look, I draw along the contour and the hair is painted over. But the transparent pixels on the background are not painted over. So I could, let's say, dye her hair if I wanted to do it. But it seems to me, to be honest, it's not really necessary here. Therefore, I will cancel these actions. So, let's cancel this lock. Just cancel it here and the lock icon has disappeared. We click once and it is no longer here. The next lock, on the contrary, doesn't allow you to paint over something. I'm trying to paint, but the program, as you can see, tells me that the layer is fixed. That is, I can't paint here. Cancel. The next parameter is motion lock. I take a move tool and unfortunately I can't move this layer in any way. This protects the layer from accidental movements of some kind. If you're afraid that this may happen, this can be useful when you are making a design layout and there are some very precise parameters there, and you are afraid to shift something. We will cancel it too. The next one is a lock on automatically attachment to editing areas and frames. Well, this is generally a very rarely used thing. And finally, a complete lock, which doesn't allow anything to be done with this layer at all. Well, cancel that too. That's all I wanted to tell you about the locks. The most important thing, of course, is to be able to remove the lock from the background layer, and let's see what we got. Right now we have a file with an unlocked background layer and two groups. And of course, I hope that you will remember all the ways to move layers and lock them. We will continue studying layers and make such a vintage postcard, which will help us understand all the features of working with layers. As you can see, there is a background and three elements. Turn the eye icon on and off to see. There is an inscription and a small tweak, which we have on the left. 3 additional elements. And of course, it is obvious that this whole composition was created by duplicating various objects. And let's see how it can be done. We'll be talking now about how to copy layers. There are 4 ways to duplicate layers. And let's start. To begin with, we will try to copy this layer with flowers, which we have at the top of our image. By the way, if I want to look at it and turn off all the other layers, I point the mouse cursor on the eye, hold down Alt and click, and I only have this layer left. And we are going back. By the way, periodically, like now, I will repeat something of what we have already talked about, because as experience shows, these moments remain better in the memory of those who study Photoshop. So obviously, we need to copy these roses again in order to place them at the bottom. So I take Move tool and click on roses. I have activated a layer with roses, and now in order to copy it, I just drag this layer onto this icon. It's the second one on the right here. And I have a copy of a layer. Now this layer is placed exactly above the layer that we have. Therefore, we don't see any changes. But if you take the Move tool, then you see that we have roses here. There are not only roses here. Let's call them girlands of flowers. And we can move these roses down. But if we want our images to be harmonious, we should mirror these roses. And now, although we are currently learning how to copy layers, I will show you one of the elements of image transformation. This will diversify our topic. So I press Ctrl+T, and now we have this frame, which means that the free transform mode has been activated. I press the right mouse button and select Flip Vertically. That's it, the picture mirrored vertically. After that, I can double click in any free space or click Enter. It depends on your Photoshop version. It's just enough to click on a free place. In other versions, you may need to click Enter. Well, that's it. It was a small digression. We copied this layer by dragging it onto the icon. How could it have been done differently? The second way, we have a twig and we need to move it to the side. We find a layer with a twig. I click on it and the layer on which it is placed is activated. If you have doubts, turn on, turn off the eye. Make sure that it is the layer you need. And the second way is to use the Layers panel. Layer, Duplicate Layer, and click OK. Similarly, we have a layer with a leaf on top, and we can move it here. And now we repeat the same thing. That was done before. Press Ctrl+T, click the right mouse button, and now we choose Flip Horizontally. Mirrored, move to the right place. And we now have 2 twigs. Next, we will need to copy these 2 twigs too, and move them down. Let's merge them into one layer, so that it would be more convenient for us, in order not to copy each twig separately. Here is a twig, and a twig 1, and we will merge them into one common layer. There is such an operation that allows you to merge the layer with the layer that is one step below it. In this case, a twig 1 will be merged with a twig, and to do it, we need to press Ctrl+E, or we can select Merge Layers in the Layers panel. So we can select it or press Ctrl+E, and we have one common layer, which is called a twig. And now, if I turn off an icon, you see 2 twigs disappear at once. Now we have to duplicate this layer with 2 twigs. Press Ctrl+J, the layer is duplicated, a twig copy. Here they are, the twigs we have. And again, we will use Free Transform. Press Ctrl+T, flip vertically. We put them in the right place and click Enter. Please note that the twigs are not very nicely arranged right now. They go to the bottom girland of flowers. And to make it more harmonious, we can take this layer, click the left mouse button and drag it below the girland layer. And you see, my twigs seems to be peeking out now. Here they are. They are placed a little lower. We can place them in some more beautiful way. We can do the same with the upper twigs. If we decide that we need to place them somehow below, then we will take and drag something here, so that they peek out from under this garland. We still have one more way to duplicate layers. Let's take a look at it. Take this layer, for example, and select Layers, Duplicate Layer. And look, we have a window here, in which, on the one hand, we can give a name to one layer. On the other hand, we can choose which document this layer is copied to. But now, and as always, by default it is copied to the document that I have open. It is Vintage one. But if you click this arrow, then all the files that are open will disappear, plus a new file. I also have a file without a name that I created just before. And let's choose it and see what happens. So, a document without a name. Layer 1 copy and click OK. Now let's look at the document without a name. These flowers were copied here. Thus, if necessary, you can send some elements to other documents. At the same time, you can even create new ones right away. Well, everything is so obvious there that I won't show it step by step now. I think if you want to, you can figure out how to do it. Create a duplicate of a layer. And if you choose a new one here, then you understand everything intuitively. Okay. Or rather cancel. Let's get back to our composition. If we look at what we are striving for, we will see that in addition to flowers, there are also, I don't even know how to call them, stretching colors, maybe. The background is not pure white, but has some color, and now we'll try to reproduce it. And now I want to draw your attention to an important rule of Photoshop. It is better that each new element is on a new layer, because this is what allows you to work with your image as conveniently as possible, edit as conveniently as possible, and it's just a must-have. And as you understand, we are smoothly moving onto the topic of creating new layers. We have learned to duplicate them, and now we'll create our own layers, and we'll edit the color transitions on them with a brush. Any operation in Photoshop can be done in different ways, and creating layers is no exception. So, the first way is to click this icon, and this will create a new layer above the layer that is currently highlighted. Well, so looks something like this, but this layer must be lower than the layers with flowers. That's why we drag it here, just above the background layer. We certainly won't make a mistake. It will be at the bottom. We'll draw with brush, create our own image. So we're creating new layers in order to create something new on them. For convenience, so that everything is in a single color scheme, I will use the eyedropper tool. Well, here it is. You can select it by pressing I. I will click here, and so I got a color that was reflected here in the color palette. When I click, I choose the color that will be used, and now I take the brush tool. The brush tool has a lot of settings. In fact, we'll analyze them in great detail over time. Right now, only two things are important to us: a soft and hard brush. A soft brush gives, let's say, stroke with such blurred edges, which is what we need now. This is the first. The second thing, this is important to us, is the size of the brush. It can be adjusted either here, by moving the slider, or you can click the square brackets, left and right, decreasing and decreasing the size. And now I'm painting over the layer. You see, I draw a semi-shadow. Basically, I can copy the same layer and mirror it, and make the same image at the bottom. But it seems to me that in the particular case, it is much easier to just draw the same thing. That's how I created this shadow. Now I want to edit greenish shades to this shadow. Theoretically, I could do it on the same layer. But what if I want to remove this shade later? It could be quite difficult for me. So I will create another layer. And this time I will create it using a keyboard shortcut. This will be a keyboard shortcut Shift plus Ctrl plus N. You can see it in the Layers panel if you select New. Click here. You can set the name of the layer exactly as we did before. The indicators that we see below we will consider later. Click OK, and we have another new blank layer. Now we take an eyedropper and take a sample of this light green color. Again, we return to the brush tool and added a little green color here. And look why it was necessary to do this on a separate layer. Right now I have a green color. In my opinion, it turned out to be too active. Therefore, since I have it on a separate layer, I can edit it separately. I go to the opacity and reduce the opacity of the layer to point that I need. Here, for example, like this. I can do the same on another layer with a shadow, and maybe I will need another percentage here. Thus, creating new layers and placing image elements on different layers give us maximum editing capabilities. Well, that means maximum creativity. We discussed with you how to duplicate layers, create new layers, and also try to transform images a little. And we talk a little about the brush tool. I will pay attention to the layers and how they are created. So, you need to duplicate the necessary layers in a similar way. Merge two layers with a tweak into one and edit tones on new layers using a brush. And of course, don't forget to save your work in PSD format. It was Peter Romanov and AIM School. See you next time. Layer mask. Hi guys, today we'll discuss a very important and interesting topic. In the previous lessons, you and I talked about layers, but the layers that we used were the most ordinary simple layers. In fact, there are many variations of other layers in Photoshop. For example, adjustment layers, layers with smart objects, vector layers, and others. And in all these layers, such an important element as a layer mask is used. Therefore, if you really want to reach the top in Photoshop, you can't make it without knowing how to work with a mask. Mask can help you to create a huge number of different special effects. And today we'll try to understand how this absolutely irreplaceable tool works. By the way, all these changing effects on the image that you are now seeing on the screen were created with the help of a layer mask. I decided that it would be better if we immediately start practicing this tool on concrete examples. So, we have this landscape. Our goal is to merge two different landscapes, winter and summer, with a smooth transition. I have already opened a winter landscape, and now I'm going to open the summer one and edit it to the winter landscape. I will remind you how to do it one of the ways. Press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+A, Ctrl+C, go back to the file with winter and press Ctrl+V. I added this layer, on which I have a file with a summer landscape. And now the most interesting thing begins. You already know that the layer can be made more transparent if you adjust the opacity settings. It is here. For example, we can reduce it, and the layer that is below will shine through the layer that is above. But sometimes it is necessary to make sure that not the entire layer is completely transparent. Some parts of it should become transparent, and some remain non-transparent at the same time. In our case, these non-transparent areas will be considered masked. Now let's see how it really works. I will make the opacity as it was and edit the mask to this layer. You can do this, for example, by clicking this icon in the Layers panel. Click, and as you can see, I have an additional white element. It is a mask. By default, the mask has a white color, and the white color in the mask means full opacity. If we added a black color to the mask, then those areas that will be painted in black will be transparent, and the areas that remain gray will be semi-transparent. And to make it a little clearer, let's do it. First, I want to draw your attention to the fact that since we now have two icons on the layer, when we have this one active, it means that the mask is on. And if we select this icon, click on it, then we will have an active layer, which we worked with in previous lessons. Let's go back to the mask. And to make some areas more transparent, let's take for example a black brush. And now I'll use this brush to draw on the image. Look, I'm drawing on the image. That's how I get a black piece. It's a part of the transparent area. Meanwhile, I have a soft brush. Look, the brush can be soft and hard. Since my brush is soft, the transitions between these two landscapes are quite soft. If I take a hard brush right now, I have a hard brush, and try to draw with it. Then, you see, I get such a clear border. And again, an additional black area appeared on the thumbnail icon of the mask layer, which just shows us that this area has become transparent. I will cancel my actions, as I don't need this piece, and we will continue. Of course, we can change the size of the brush and its transparency. Right now we have, well, let's assume it as 100%. And therefore, I had completely transparent areas in those parts of the image where I was using a black brush. I will take a soft brush because it's more beautiful. And if I will make opacity like this and use a brush, then look, I have an image that is on the layer below. But at the same time, it is not as sharp as the previous case, and a gray color appears on the mask icon, which means partial transparency. In our case, this transparency corresponds to the transparency of the brush, and this is how we can display those areas that we want to display. It depends on our artistic preferences, but let's say we did something wrong. And the most important advantage of the mask will help us. When we make some areas transparent, it don't disappear completely, it's simply masked. It's just hidden from the eyes of the beholder. But if we want to bring them back, then we can do it easily. So we used a black brush before, and now we need a white one. By the way, if suddenly you don't have black and white colors by default right now, then you need to press D, and then you'll have a black and white color. And of course, when we take a brush, we use the color that is in the square on top. If I want to switch to white now, I either click on this arrow or press X, and the squares change places. So I have a white color with a non-transparency. I can, for example, make this area a little less transparent using this brush, like that. But if I want to completely remove this transparent area that I have somewhere, I will have the non-transparent of 100%. And look, I can return the image to its original state. So the black color makes the areas transparent. The white color restores their original opacity. Now we have done all this using the brush tool, but in fact there are other tools that can be used to make fills in black or white. For example, we can use a gradient. I will now create a new layer for demonstration. I click on this icon. I am creating a new layer. By the way, look, I am going to need white and black squares now. I press D and they turn white and black. And now I will fill the layer that I just created with white. So I filled it up by pressing Ctrl plus backspace, but we'll talk about this later. This is a small digression, and let's look at the gradient tool. It is located here and is called by G key. When we select this tool, we can create a gradient between two or more different colors. Now we will consider only the black and white version. We must have black and white colors active here. Or we can choose black and white from the ready-made samples. If I hold down the left mouse button while this tool is active and swipe it from right to left, I get this black to white gradient. I can do it in any direction. For example, from one corner to another. And then this gradient will change. I can even do this from the center, for example. So I get a black color in the area where I start to move the cursor, because it is on top. Thus, we can change the direction of a gradient in any convenient direction, and there are different types of gradients. You can check them by yourself. Each of these buttons is responsible for how the gradient will be created. For example, we have radial and diagonal gradients. This one. See, something like this. But gradient is not the topic of our lesson, and so we will focus on the simplest gradient, on this one, which fills linearly, and see how it can be used when working with a mask. Although, of course, other types of gradient can be used too. Now let's see how it works. Therefore, I will now remove this layer. I remind you that this can be done by pressing the left mouse button and dragging it to this basket. That is, now I make the mask active by clicking on the thumbnail of the mask. I have the gradient tool active, and I remember that the area will be transparent, where the black color begins. That's why I choose this edge. Here I assume that I will have a transparent area and move the mouse cursor to the left side. And as you can see, this area of the winter landscape becomes transparent for me. This right section of the upper layer becomes transparent, and the landscape begins to shine through from below. And if I do the opposite, then as you can see, this is what we will get. It would be possible, of course, to stop there, but we can combine the work of a brush and a gradient. Therefore, I take a brush, since I want to make some areas more transparent. So I took a black brush. You can adjust its size by pressing the square brackets, left and right. I press the left one and make the brush smaller. And now I added the snow parts on this layer. And let's say I want this area to be less transparent. Let me do it. Rather, on the contrary, I want it more transparent, because the lower layer shines through. Here I can change the settings of the brush, somehow make it medium transparency. Let's say making a glade like this. But this section, for example, I want to make completely non-transparent. Then I take a white brush by clicking on the arrow. I set 100%, and look, here I have the summer part of our landscape coming back. There are a lot of opportunities for creativity here, and you can do it in a variety of ways, and every time you'll get some new, interesting result. I take the black brush again, for example. Here I added, for example, this part. I use a white brush in a different way. You can experiment for a very long time with different locations, transparent and non-transparent areas. Look at what I got. There can be a lot of options. And once again, pay attention to the icon of the mask layer, where the transparent and non-transparent areas are displayed. Your homework is to create something like this. You will need two files with a summer and a winter landscape, and you need to combine them in some beautiful way using a mask layer. And you already remember this image that I have shown at the beginning of our lesson. It is made on the same principle. If you look at this palette, then everything will become clear to you. I hope that you will be able to do this. In addition to everything else that we were doing right now, free transform modes were also used here. For example, when I added images to the source file, they were very large, and I reduced them. For example, now I take this file, selected Ctrl+A, copy, Ctrl+C, and paste, Ctrl+V. Okay, you see, it is very large. It is much larger than the image that we have. I press Ctrl+T and reduce the image to the scale I need. Here, for example, if necessary, I can mirror it. I can do anything. Let's say you are satisfied with this option. And then I added a mask here, and I do what I think is necessary. For example, like this. Well, or something else. And then use the brush tool. These are the general explanations for this exercise, but I still want you to figure it out on your own. Yes, you can also change, of course, transparency. Here, for example, like this. Just be creative, and you'll practice what we did in previous lessons by doing this exercise. We have two homework assignments. I showed how to do one of them in detail. I hope you can handle the second one. We continue to study layer masks. And now on the screen you can see what we are going to do today. Well, let's get started. Now we'll take a portrait of the girl and make it partly black and white and partly colored. And we'll do it using masks. And as you have probably already guessed, we will need an additional layer, since a mask implies the presence of several layers. So let's make a copy of the layer. Now, since we have a black and white image here, we need to make one of the layers black and white. Let's do it. We need to go to the image menu, click Adjustments and select Desaturate, or press Shift plus Ctrl plus U. Now we can adjust our image a little more to make it more contrasting and expressive. In the future, we will study in great detail all the possibilities of increasing brightness and contrast. And now we'll make it easier. We will just go to the menu and select Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast, and click Edit Contrast in the appeared window. Adjust about up to the size and maybe add a little bit of brightness, like that. Okay, and now the most interesting thing, the mask itself. If you remember, the last time we added a mask to a layer using an icon, and we had such a white mask. Initially the layer was completely colored, but we added transparent areas with a black brush. But it is possible to go from the opposite. I mean, we can add a black mask, making the layer completely transparent, and conversely, added some visible details. Let's remove the mask that we have now. I select it and click on the trash bin, delete, and we will create a new mask. In order for its application to be effective, we need to swap the layers, but we can do this while the bottom layer is locked, so we need to unlock it. Double click on it and it is unlocked, and swap places, like that. Now we're adding a layer mask to the top color layer that we have, but not in the same way as we did last time. I press Alt and click on the mask icon, and that's what we see. In fact, my top layer, which was completely colored before, becomes invisible, completely transparent. Well, remember that black is the color of transparency on the mask. And now I want to make some parts non-transparent. In fact, I want to make lips non-transparent. I take a white brush, because we need to restore the image. I select the necessary size of the brush. I have a soft one. Using square brackets, I zoom in the image so that everything is neat, and I start to paint over the contour of the lips with a brush. If the brush is transparent, then my color will not be completely restored. It will be restored only to the extent of opacity of the brush. I periodically change the brush size in order to make everything neat. And that's what I got. And as a result, we get this. You can immediately see those elements in mask that we needed to make non-transparent. Thus, you can choose wherever to create a regular mask, a white mask that is created by default, or press Alt and create a black mask that will particularly make the layer to which it is added completely transparent, and then display some details. And you can also create a mask in the Layers menu. Select Layer Mask, Reveal All, and you will have a mask layer added, like that. But usually no one does it this way, because it is much more convenient to use this icon at the bottom of the Layers menu. Of course, now we don't need this additional mask, so we click on the trash bin and remove this mask. After that, we can save our file, for example in JPEG, if we want to show it to someone already, and post it in social networks, or in PSD if we are going to do something with in Photoshop later. It is your first task for this lesson, and you and I are moving on to the second one. Let's see how we can use a mask to separate an object from the background, and subsequently replace this background with another one. A little ahead of myself, I'll tell you that for such manipulations we always use selection tools. Now we'll talk a little about this topic, but the main focus will still be on studying this mask. So let's start with the fact that we need to unlock this layer, on which we have a girl on a white background. You already know how to do it. Now we take a tool called Quick Selection. This tool is the third from the top. It is called by the layer W. Please note that there are two tools here, a magic wand and a quick selection. A repeated pressing of the W changes these tools between each other. Now we need to choose not a magic wand. We need to choose the quick selection tool. Took it. Please note that you have the same settings at the top as me. The icon with plus should be active. Just like the brush, the selection tool has its size adjusted by square brackets. So let's take a slightly larger size. And look what I'm doing now. I'm just sweeping along the contour of the girl's figure, and now her silhouette is selected. If suddenly somehow I, for example, captured some extra area, which we don't need here now, then in this case I can press Alt. My icon changes to a minus, and I can correct this area. I can also use a square bracket to reduce the size of the brush. Press Alt again and make sure that I have selected exactly the area that I need. Like this. Let me remove unnecessary details. Here I got a selection. And now the most interesting thing is that we remove the background using a mask. Click on the mask icon and we don't have any background anymore. Now all we have to do is edit a background. So I added a background. I had it on a higher layer. I swap places, arrange the way I need. Press Ctrl plus T, zoom in, so that there are no unnecessary areas. Everything will depend on you, on how you will develop your creative idea. Because for me, let's say, in this example that I made, I did it this way. You see that I have copied the background several times. Somehow, with the help of masks, I removed something, added something. I added the same image of the bokeh here. Bokeh is such colored, glowing circles, if you remember. And it's my result. You can do this as you want, whatever you like. You can analyze it, but of course it would be much better if you showed me creativity and did perhaps even something much better. But let's go back to our image. We just talked about some aesthetic moments, but don't forget that there are also technical ones. After all, if you look closely, you can clearly see that the contour of the girl, it is rather sharp. It looked like an application that was cut out and simply glued. Of course, I would like this contour to be softer. And the mask will help us again. Click twice on the thumbnail of the mask layer and we have a window like this. In this lesson, we'll consider all its properties, because for this we still need to give other examples. And now we'll look at the feather. Feather implies editing the edges of your image. If you increase the feather value, then look, edges become softer. I want them even more softer. And the further I move the slider, the softer these edges become. Take a look at what it become. So, okay, our value will be like this. Also, here you can see the density value. In fact, density is the same thing as transparency. Now we have it 100%. And these areas, which are related with the background, look completely transparent. But after all, the mask doesn't completely remove any elements. It just makes them hidden If we reduce this density, we'll immediately see a white background. And here on the layer mask icon, you can see that the black color has changed to gray. Can you imagine how much you can do with a mask? You have a lot of opportunities. Let's return it to 100%. And we will close it here. And that's what we have got so far. Now the outline of the girl is already quite acceptable. We can add some other details to this image and bring this image to the desirable result. For example, like this. I do not require you to repeat exactly what I have. I'm just showing you an idea. You can even take some of your own images as background images and use them. You don't have to use my pictures. But it is better to take this girl, because if you take more complex image, you may not be able to select it yet, because there are some nuances. Therefore, now we take a simple figure, and as for the background, I hope to see interesting creative works from you. In general, this was the second homework assignment for today. And as an example, so that you understand the possibilities of using the mask tool, I want to show you something. Very often there are images in which there is some reflection, and at the same time a shadow from objects. Especially those who are going to work in design probably know that this is a very commonly used technique. And let's see how this can be done with a mask. We'll just take a slightly different image. We'll have such fruits, and we'll do something like this. If you look at the layers panel, then of course you'll understand everything. There is a main image here. There is an inverted copy of it, which has an applied mask, and with the help of a gradient, it is made transparent. And look, usually the further away the reflection is from the object, the more blurry it looks. And it is on this principle that the gradient was made here. If you go to this mask, well, let's probably even try to repeat it now. So I take the gradient. And look, I should have the most transparent area at the bottom. I start moving from the black color and pull up the mask. And you see, if I started for example from here, it would be like this. Even more transparent. If I start from the very bottom, it turns out exactly like this. That is, you can make any reflection you want, but there is also a small shadow here. If I remove it, it looks like this. It looks a little unnatural. Therefore, I created an additional clean layer on which I just drew a shadow with a brush. How do we do this? Let's try to repeat it again too. When this layer is active, I click on the icon and create a clean layer. Well, it is created about the layer that is currently active. Then, using the eyedropper tool, I take a color sample from here, so that our shadow is more or less realistic. I take the brush tool and just draw. Well, something like this. But now I'm doing a little rough. I need to be more careful, of course. Reduce transparency. And that's what we get. Well, it's not as beautiful as I wanted. Let's leave it this way, for example. Thus, I offer you another method to gain skills working with a mask, and I really hope that now you'll easily cope with this tool in absolutely any situation. Therefore, I hope that everything will be fine, that everything will work out for you. Let's see what is the difference between mirroring or some other rotation of the entire image, when all layers are turned on and rotated by a certain angle, or mirrored in the same direction. This is the first situation. And the second situation is when we need to change the location of only one layer, when we need to mirror only one layer. Let's talk about this using the concrete example. Let me make a copy of the layer now. Let's place them like this, so that we can see what is going on. And look, if we go to the image menu, select image rotation, flip vertically, then we immediately flip both of our images. If we use this menu, the operation is applied to the entire image as a whole. Let's cancel this action and do it differently now. I select only the layer that I need to change. I will choose the bottom layer. Now I'm choosing the bottom layer, which will be our reflection. After that, I choose the free transform mode. I press keyboard shortcut Ctrl+T. A frame like this appears. The same action could be selected via the edit menu. So, we have selected the free transform. I clicked the right mouse button and here I choose to flip vertically. But please note, in this case only the layer that we have selected is mirrored. After that I can, for example, place it like this and then apply a mask and make a reflection. I can also apply free transform to multiple layers. For example, I can select several layers by pressing Ctrl. I take it all back. Look, I'm making two layers active at once by pressing Ctrl. Similarly, I press Ctrl plus T. I press the right mouse button and select Flip vertically. And in this case, all the layers which I have selected are flipped vertically. I press Enter. Let's go back and repeat once again. How to flip only one layer. We select only one layer. We have only one active layer. Press Ctrl plus T. Press the right mouse button. Select the transform we need. In this case, flip vertically. Then we move it in the direction we need. And click on empty space or press Enter. Then apply a mask and, for example, take a gradient and apply a reflection, like that. I hope that this operation will now be more understandable and you will be able to do this task. It was Peter Romanov and AIM School. See you next time. Blending mods. Hello dear friends, the topic we have today is very interesting. We will talk about blending mods. To be honest, when I was preparing the material for this lesson, I couldn't stop, because there are an infinity number of examples of the application of this wonderful operation. In addition to the blending mods, we will also discuss some other operations. We will analyze these operations in detail in the future, but today we will talk about them a little. Firstly, it will help you to be more interested in today's topic, and you'll see more expressive examples. And secondly, when we get to the study of these operations, you'll already have a little idea about them, and it will be easier for you to get acquainted with them and master them. Layer blending mods are also already applied to the image of cup of coffee, which I use today as a wallpaper. For example, it is absolutely clear that the steam that rises from a cup of coffee, it was placed here precisely by using this operation. But let's start from the beginning. The blending mod implies the interaction of pixels located on different layers, and it is obvious that there must be at least two of these layers, because they need to interact between each other. So let's take this cup of coffee and duplicate the main layer. You already know how to do it. So I duplicated the layer, and you see that these blending are on the panel of layers. By default, we have the normal. We click here and see a long list of 27 blending mods, which are divided into groups according to some common features, which we will talk about today. If you just move the mouse cursor in Photoshop, then you will immediately change the blending mod. Look at how my image changes when I just move the cursor. It immediately becomes completely different. In earlier versions, you can simply roll the mouse wheel. And, as you have already seen, there are a lot of different changes. You can even do it more quickly, and you will see how everything changes. It is necessary, of course, to understand the principle of these mods to apply them successfully. In previous example, we simply duplicated the layer, and we mixed two, in general, completely identical images with each other. In fact, we don't always have to duplicate the layer. There are also other options. For example, we want to work with some part of the layer, so we need to select this part of the layer. We take the quick selection tool, and now we'll select the girl's lips. So I select carefully. I remind you that if you go somewhere outside the area that would like to select, then you need to press Alt. A minus icon will appear, and you can carefully correct everything. Well, if something has gone radically wrong, then you can completely cancel the selection by pressing the keyboard shortcut Ctrl plus D. And now attention, an interesting moment. Now we'll press Ctrl plus J as we did before, but we don't duplicate the entire layer, but only the area we selected, that is, the lips. You see, on the new layer we have only lips. Of course, they could be selected more accurately. For example, you could use a mask and other tools, but we will not focus on this now. I'll just fix it a little bit by taking the eraser tool. Here are some small places. You can even edit the edge with a transparent eraser, so that it is not so sharp. So we turn it back on, and look, I go into layer blending mode and start moving the cursor. And you can see how the color changes depending on which of blending modes is active. This is how we can change the color of some details that we selected and placed them on a new layer, and then we choose the one we like. Of course, you can do this intuitively, but it's better when you understand how all of them work. And then you can use the blending modes successfully. That's what we had. And let's move on to the next file and analyze how it all works. First of all, duplicate the layer. I have already done this, and let's see. So, you have already noticed there are several groups here that distinguish blending modes by common characteristics: normal and dissolve. Well, normal is as it is. Dissolve also has little effect on the image and is used rarely, very rarely, I would say. And now we will look at the darken modes. If we scroll them like this, we will see that the image becomes darker. This happens because the pixels of the upper layer are multiplied by the pixels of the lower layer, and the intensity of dark shades becomes much higher. Meanwhile, the intensity of light shades remains unchanged. Thus, we get this effect. The most common mode in this section is the multiply. Let's apply it. And you see, the girl became immediately tanned. This is a very convenient operation if you need to edit a tan. Of course, you can adjust the degree of transparency and make this tan stronger or weaker. Let's it make more visible. But there is one thing. It turns out that we have darkened not only the skin, which we for example want to be darker, but also other part of the image. And in this case, as in many other cases with blending layers, a mask will help us. We take a mask, edit it, take a black brush and just go through the places of the image where we would like to use the blending mode. And you can see that in these places the image returns to its original state, like that. Or for example, if I wanted to make the skin a little lighter here, I could also do it this way. And of course, just as in the previous case, we can work with some individual parts of the image, making them more saturated, darker. For example, I can create a new layer and using the eyedropper tool, take some kind of lip color sample. I take a brush. With the help of square brackets, I make the brush smaller and I just paint over the lips. But it would be better to do it right away with the multiply mode turned on. But I will do it like this once I have already started. So look, I'm switching to multiply mode. And so I got such a rich color, which of course I can make less saturated. Well, for example, like this. In the same way, you can edit other accents on the face. But I would also work with the eyes here on the layer mask. Because, well, I don't want to darken them so much right here. I would probably return them to original state a little bit, with the help of a translucent brush. But we can edit glare here in the most active places. You need to edit a mask on this layer. So with the help of a black brush, I can for example modify some parts on the lips a little bit. So it will look more natural. And now it seems as if the girl has just returned from the resort. Let's see what we had before. That was such a pale girl, and that what we did with her, with help of very simple manipulations. By the way, this is your first homework assignment, so remember, obviously, other blending modes from the same group will create similar effects, with just a few nuances. For example, darken and linear burn makes the shadows even deeper and even darker. But still the multiply mode is used most often. Let's move on to the next group, a group of modes, which are lightening. It is below the group that we discussed before. Everything became darker and the light remained the same in the previous example. That is, no contrast was added. Light tones didn't become lighter. In the blending mode group, everything is actually the opposite. The black color becomes completely transparent, not visible, and light shades become as intense as possible. Here we can see it by moving the mouse a little, or rolling the wheel among these modes. Let's see what opportunities the group gives us. If in previous case we got a darkening on the image or its individual parts, then this is the opposite. Plus, it gives additional features when working with objects on a black background. But more about that in a few minutes. So, about the lightning. We go to the top layer. I have already made a copy and choose one of the modes. The screen mode is most often used because the other modes, they are more intense and they are rarely used, and the multiply that we used before. So select the screen. The image became lighter, and I, for example, edit a mask here. Take a brush and do the same, as in previous case. I'm going through all the places of the image which I don't want to blend with a black brush. Periodically I take the white brush if I did something wrong. That's it. Here I want to light up my face as much as possible now. Look at what we had. What a dark-skinned girl she was, and what she became. Now I'll use a black brush in the eye area to make the girl more dramatic. You see what happens to my mask? This layer becomes transparent, and now the eyes become so expressive. If this is too much, I'll go back to the white brush again, make it partly transparent, make this effect a little less intense. Then I take the black one. I can make brighter eyebrows, for example, or brighter lips. Like that. Perhaps this is also too much. I'm going back to the white brush. All the time I change the opacity depending on what I want to get. That is, it's all quite such a delicate moment. It would be nice to emphasize some trends. So it will be a black brush. Give a little volume, so that our image will be somehow expressive. Switching between white and black brush all the time. I think that you master the mask tool perfectly. We'll talk about it so many times in different contexts that by the end of our course you'll be a professional. Here I added some shadows, and that's what I got. If you spend a little more time on this work, then of course the effect could be much more vivid. And if you also added knowledge of various other tools that we will study, it will be even better. I will add some shadows. And look, here is what we got. And that's what we had before. This is how we can, working with light and shadow, make the image lighter, and not just make it lighter, but do it so that our image meets our intention. And now about their useful properties in the screen mode, which allows us to place objects on a black background in images. Let's take this smoke. Let's copy it and put it in our image. Here I have added a new layer that completely overlaps the layer below. And now, when I change the blending mode to screen, all the black elements of this layer will become completely transparent. So I choose the screen, and here I can place the smoke in some other way. You can work with it for a very long time. Somehow change the size. You can also place any glowing bright objects that are on a dark background, for example fire or some kind of flashes. That is, there are very many options for everything, and you can't list them all. Now you see another example of using this effect, but with multicolored smoke, and another glass like this. We talked about blending modes and studied darken and lightening modes. We will continue to talk about it, and first of all I would like to demonstrate to you how you can combine these two modes. Let's see how you can use these two blending modes to make your face more sculptural. We need to make the light areas lighter now and the dark ones darker. We want to emphasize the contours of the face. We create a new clean layer. Using an eyedropper, we take a sample of the color of some light area. There, I take a soft brush and start drawing something like this in those areas where I want it to be lighter. Click blending modes and choose the screen. As you see, the lightning. Well, it's too much. If the lightning turns out to be strong, then of course we can always work with transparency and make sure that the lightning is the way we need. Sometimes you can even create several layers in order to make the layers brighter or, on the contrary, dimmer. Well, for example, like this. Now I'm creating another layer. In the previous case, the screen mode lightened the areas as much as possible, because in this mode the intensity of light shades increases. However, here it will be the opposite. Similarly, I take a color sample with an eyedropper and set the multiply mode so that I can see what I am doing. And with the help of a brush, I can add shadows in some areas. Of course, you can always make the brush more transparent, for example, or vice versa. We added shadows in some places, like that. And one more little trick. If you want to make such a dark vignette around the edge of your image, you need to create a new layer in the same way and take a suitable color sample. For example, from the here, we take a brush, we set the multiply mode and do it like this. By the way, Ctrl is pressed. The brush draws a straight line. You can do it somewhere and edit it like this, whatever you like. Something like that. we had a normal blending mode here. Then, you see, it turns out to be some kind of faded brown color, and the multiply mode creates transparency and gives this kind of saturation. You can even create several layers like this, and edit separate sections on each of them. Enough with this photo. I think that the principle is generally clear to you. And if we turn off eyes icons now, we will see what we had before and what we have now. Something like this. And now, if you see photos, for example, like this one, I specifically show you photos of different genres. You can guess how these beautiful light glares and such deep shadows were added. All this can be fixed with the help of the blending modes. Not only those that I showed you, but also others. The shadows or colors in this particular example are obviously made according to this principle. Let's talk now about the next group of blending modes, the contrast group. If we now go to the top layer in this file and start changing these modes, moving the mouse cursor, then we'll see how the image becomes more and more contrasting. This happens because dark pixels become as dark as possible, light ones become as light as possible, and at the same time, the average shades do not change their tone. We can verify this if we create a new layer and fill it with gray light, with settings 128, 128, 128. This is the most average gray color. Press the keyboard shortcut Alt plus backspace. We have filled this layer with gray color. Let's turn this one off for now, to see everything as it really is. And look, overlay mode. Except for hard mix, which works a little differently, all other modes do not give any changes at all. Here we have a photo, and here it is with blending modes. Let's do another experiment. I create a new layer, take the gradient tool, transition from black to white, like this, and I fill in this layer, moving the mouse cursor from bottom to top, from black to white. And look, if I now apply contrast modes, then you see that the part of the image that was filled with blacks come more saturated, darker, and the light part is lighter, which confirms what we talked about. Light pixels become even lighter when this mode is applied, and dark pixels become even darker. The middle part is where we have a gray color. If you look at the gray color here, when using all these modes, it remains almost the same as it was before. And of course, we can use this mode just to edit contrast. At the same time, we can decrease or increase its level, as we like. Well, we can also use it to create various creative effects. Moreover, it should be noted that the overlay mode, for example, gives greater contrast, and the soft light mode gives a more delicate, diffused light, although the contrast is also added. So just like that, these two blending modes, overlay and soft light, are mainly used. And now we will see what can be done with them and how they can be useful to us. Let's take this photo of a girl and use the overlay mode to try to get this kind of soft light effect. And first of all, we'll make a copy of the layer. We'll desaturate this layer. We need this in order for the dark and light colors to give us maximum saturation, creating exactly the effect that we need. And we go to the image, adjustments, and select desaturate, Shift plus Ctrl plus U. So we have a desaturated photo. Look, here are very deep shadows and very highlighted colors. Now to create this depth in shadows and in colors, we'll make this layer even more contrasting. To do this, we click the image, adjustments, and choose posterize, and we set the number of levels, 4. If we edit more, everything will change. We set 4. In the future, we will talk more about this option. So far, it is enough. Then we need to blur to make it more softer. Find the filter, blur, select Gaussian blur. All settings are different on different photos. Here we have these settings. Click OK, and now we have such a blurry picture. We apply the overlay blending mode, and now we have almost the same image that we have here, but this corner, as you can see, is darkened. To do this, we create another new layer. We take an eyedropper and take a color sample. Then we take a brush and paint it all with the color we need, like that. And it's better to apply multiply mode, so that it has the same depth. Here we can edit this too. And that's what we got. If we turn off eyes icons now, we will see what we had and what we have now. In fact, this effect looks very good not only on portraits, but also on landscapes, on still lifes. It looks good on many images. And of course, we can always adjust the level of transparency, make this effect more or less highlighted, depending on what effect you want to achieve. And let's compare how the same image will look if you apply soft light here. Look, you see what a difference it makes. It is a similar effect, but it is much less highlighted. You can look, of course, at other options. That's the way it works. Well, let's leave the overlay and move on to the soft light. I have already duplicated the layer. Let's start by adding a little contrast to this photo with the help of soft light. Look, the overlay would give us a very harsh effect, but soft light gives another good option, especially if you slightly reduce the level of transparency. But I want to focus on the fact that soft light is ideal for applying different textures. Using it, you can also change the color of individual parts of the image. Let's create a new layer and fill it with a rainbow gradient. I choose gradient, and here we have a rainbow gradient among the presets. It is transparent. I'm taking it, and I'm paint this layer with a gradient, like that. Now, if I apply soft light here, I will get the effect of tinting, the level of which, of course, can be adjusted. And as always, don't forget about the mask. We can edit it, take a black brush, and reduce the level of impact of green color on those parts of the image that we consider necessary. I will do it this way, but at the same time, the tinting is still there. This is an interesting effect. If we didn't fill the photo with a rainbow gradient, but just some one color, then we could, for example, change the hair color or some other details of the image this way. Just like overlay, soft light is really one of the most frequently used modes. Let's move on to the next blending group. You can assume that it implies various mathematical calculations. This group is used quite rarely, but still we will talk about it. When pixels of one and another layer are combined, a black color is obtained. It happens if pixels are absolutely identical. Let's apply difference mode. What does this give us? Look, the pixels of one layer completely coincide with the pixels of the other layer, and we get a perfect black color. But if we take the Move tool and start moving the top layer, then you see what happens. We immediately see some colored areas in the place where our pixels are shifted, and this operation allows you to perfectly combine two images, if necessary, literally pixel by pixel. Because if I start moving and my pixels are completely compatible with each other, then I will just get the same black color. So this operation can be used for alignment. Well, let's look at other blending modes, which are still somewhat more commonly used. I will create a new layer now, just in case. I think you have understood, but I will still say that the new layer is an absolutely clean layer, with nothing on it. And a duplicate layer is a copy of a layer that repeats already existing layer. So I created a new layer, and let's try to use these mods on the last group. Perhaps it would be the best if I show you an example. Let's say we take hue, and I will choose some color now. Well, let's have one like this, for example. I will take a brush. The layer is already in the hue mode, and I paint it, and you see what is going on. The color that I had is replaced by another one. Since I have an opacity of 38%, then I get not the blue that I choose. But if I take a larger level, then I can edit some brighter areas in some places. That is, there is a lot of things you can draw here. This is how we can change the color of some parts of the image using this mod. Let's create another layer and apply saturation to it. Let's try it. And look, I have the same blue color. I will set 100%, regardless of the color of my brush. The level of saturation simply changes on areas where I use my brush. And if we change the saturation to color, then yes, I will have the same color again. And if you choose luminosity, then you just see this effect. It's hard for me to describe it, but sometimes it's also necessary. Let's leave the saturation already, something like that, so you can work out some details of the image. So now I'm making my lips more saturated, but just like that, selectively. That's what I got as a result of these manipulations. Of course, you can reduce the level of exposure by adjusting the opacity of the layer. And now let's move on to the homework. Let's remember everything we did today. So the first task is to create a contouring of a girl's face using the lightning and darken blending modes. The second task is to create such an image with soft focus using the overlay mode. The third task is to apply a rainbow texture to the portrait of a girl, and of course a little extra work on the layer mask. And the fourth task is to change the color of the hair of this girl with colored hair. This is a small addition to the lesson. We will talk about the difference between the hue and saturation modes. I created a new layer, and let's see what happens when we choose the saturation mode. Let's set it. In this case, we use the saturation mode. It turns out that the upper layer set the saturation settings for those colors that are at the bottom. Initially, brightness and color of the colors that are on the layer below do not change, but their saturation is changing. This is probably not very easy to understand, because the color may disappear altogether, even in this mode, but it just means that its saturation has changed. Look, for example, I'm going to take this blue color and try to draw on this upper layer. And in saturation mode, nothing really happens to here, because the saturation of this blue color is very close to saturation of the pink color. But if I start to draw on the background, then here we will see some changes, because there is a difference. The same thing will happen if I use a brush on the skin. In this case, the saturation will become higher, because the saturation of color that I use now is higher. If the saturation is lower than this color, then the opposite will happen. Now, instead of blue, let's take this light color. And look, I'm using a brush on this girl's hair and face, and the saturation here is even lower, and the image becomes actually black and white. Let's add black and white colors. If I use black and white colors which have zero saturation, then our image becomes black and white. That's the same thing happens if I use white color. See what happens. Let's take a color that is more saturated than the color that is on the base below. For example, I will take this bright one. By the way, saturation can be opened by pressing S key. Look, right now I have a bright red color. I will put it here, and I already have a saturation of 11. If I draw over here, the color doesn't change. It becomes more saturated. So, if I will use a color with low level of saturation, a color close to gray, on sections where we have a rather saturated color, then nothing will happen for me. Let's take some color. Let's try. So, you see, it also turns out to be a close shade to black and white, something like this. Here at the bottom we have a less saturated color, and on the upper layer we work with a more saturated color. If we use a color more saturated than the original one that we have on the lower layer, then the color becomes more intense. It seems to us that it's more intense, but in fact we just increase its saturation. And if we use a less intense color, then on the contrary, no changes will occur. We will talk more about it a little later, and we will learn the adjustment layers, and I think that then it will become a little more clear to you. So let's, for example, now duplicate the half of the image. That's how we will do it. I press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+G. I will apply saturation mode to it. You see, nothing has changed, because these colors have been repeated, and the saturation of the colors that are on the layer above hasn't changed at all. And now let's change the mode for this layer. We have a half. We'll choose hue. And nothing has changed for me either, but it hasn't changed here for a completely different reason. Let's use one more layer. Let's add hue and see what will happen. In this case, the opposite happens. The color saturation, which we have set by the original image, remains, but at the same time its color changes. Let's take, for example, the blue color and try to paint. You see, the color changes, but the saturation of the image remains unchanged. Only the color changes. And if I draw order a cake, then I will not make the cream bright blue, because its saturation is what it is. Saturation close to white. That is, white and black colors minimally change their color. White and black will not change at all, and the closer we are to these colors, the less effect of the hue mode we will see. For example, if we draw a black brush on the layer below, then it is black. The black color remains black. And if we draw with a white color, then the white color remains white. Let's use 50% gray color. Let's set it 128, 128 and 128. If we use it, then it will also remain the same. Let's summarize. I'm going to take a red brush now and draw a line with it on a clean layer with the normal blending mode. I put the first dot. Holding Shift, I put the second. I got a smooth line this way. Now, if I change the blending mode to saturation, then look, I have changed the saturation of the color. My background didn't turn red, it just occurred the saturation of that red color that I used on the layer 1. But if I switch the same layer to the hue mode, then in this case, it is the color that will change. I got a shade of red. But although it was a bright red color, the saturation is used from the layer below. The saturation is determined by the lower layer in this situation, and the red color used on the layer with the hue mode adds a red tint, but the saturation remains on the layer that we have below. The hue and saturation are such shifters. In saturation mode, it is the saturation that is determined by the new layer. In the hue mode, it is the color, like that. I hope that you now understand the difference between these two modes, and see you next time.